The fun life of a troll in the Marvel Universe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 26, Return to Life. Sherlock didn't know how Tony dealt with SHIELD, and Sherlock didn't want to know. After killing Obadiah Stane, Sherlock felt as if a big stone had finally landed. Even when he got up the next morning, this feeling did not diminish at all. The feeling of freedom that existed all the time made Sherlock make a decision. He decided to pursue his dream before crossing. Although Sherlock didn't dare to return to the big country in the east under the emotion of homesickness, it didn't prevent Sherlock from taking a very hardcore journey through the lighthouse country on the other side of the ocean, right? What's more, after coming here, all conditions have been ripe, with the American Big V8, the so-called crossover artifact called "Fuck the Environmental Protection," the Big Raptor, that the Environmental Protection girl was furious about, and there was no worry about funds. In addition to his own magic and the portal authorized by the Ancient One, Sherlock can even drive through various scenic roads in the United States during the day, lock the car, and go home to sleep at night, and continue driving through the next day. Of course, if you do this, it would be too inexperienced, so Sherlock made a bold decision to buy a tent. Even if you don't go home to sleep in a tent, Sherlock can sleep in a 3-bedroom and 1 living room through magic. Damn, is magic so inconvenient? Just do it when you think of it. After saying hello to the uncle in the store, Sherlock drove to the largest local outdoor goods supermarket. After a whole day of shopping, Sherlock almost filled the cargo box of the Raptor pickup truck and returned to his store. In the next few days, Sherlock did not appear on the Salted Fish lounge chair in his store and fiddled with the necessary equipment alone in his room. To be honest, Sherlock didn't expect that the magic tent with 3 bedrooms and 1 living room was so difficult to make. It was not what Sherlock imagined, that a few traceless expansion spells would be enough. Fortunately, there are all kinds of books in the magic library. After experiencing a failure, Sherlock successfully found a book how to make a magic tent in the library. Sherlock made it almost by himself, while looking at the secretary, praising the great magic. After the production was completed, Sherlock was full of a sense of accomplishment. Of course, there is a way to save trouble. This thing is considered an all-chemical product in Sherlock's library, and it is sold in another vending machine. But at that price, Sherlock can only say that I have that spare money. It would be great to buy some potions, and I can also have the joy of opening a blind box. Besides, let alone other things, the aesthetic taste of wizards for these items from the Muggle world, well, how to say it, it's hard to describe. Sherlock even suspected that, if he really bought a tent produced in the magic world, he would probably be laughed to death if he met the same traveler when he spent the night during the time travel. Think about the grand occasion of the Quidditch World Cup in the 4th grade in the original Harry Potter. Picking any one of them at random would be an abnormal explosion in the Muggle world. Moreover, with the mentality of riding a bicycle to the bar and saving where necessary, Sherlock also felt that it was more reliable to make this thing by himself. After all, the various consumables were about twice as cheap as those in the vending machine. After completing all the preparations, Sherlock confidently carried the various equipment he had prepared downstairs one by one and began to load them into the back of his pickup truck. Just after loading all his equipment and checking the status of his car, Sherlock just sat in the driver's seat and prepared to leave when a roar of the engine came from afar. At first Sherlock didn't care, but soon, an Audi R8 sports car appeared in Sherlock's field of vision and directly stopped Sherlock, who was about to leave. Soon, Sherlock knew who could do such a dangerous thing: his good uncle, Tony Stark. Watching Tony whizzing down from his supercar, coming to the window of his Raptor, and knocking on it, Sherlock opened the window helplessly and looked at the showy man who announced that he was Iron Man not long ago. "Dear Uncle Tony, what can I do for you? If nothing else, I would like to leave as soon as possible." Facing Sherlock's sarcastic tone, Tony was not panicked at all, raised his eyebrows slightly, looked at Sherlock with a smile and said, It seems that I just helped my dear nephew get rid of the investigation of some troublesome people, and now I'm about to be abandoned by my dear nephew. By the way, Sherlock, do you think I should go to a one-eyed dragon who looks very difficult to mess with to talk about the magician's great power that night? Facing Tony's naked and undisguised threat, is Sherlock the kind of person who can be threatened? Unfortunately, Sherlock is. After hearing Tony's threat, Sherlock put on a lacquer smile without hesitation, got out of the car carefully, and invited Tony to the co-pilot. In the process, he was extremely humble, opening the car door and holding the roof, fearing that Tony would be a little unhappy. "My dear uncle, what are you talking about? Come on, be careful of the steps. Sit down first, I'll be back soon." After helping Tony to the passenger seat, Sherlock, who was extremely servile, did not forget to go to the store to pour a cup of coffee and respectfully handed it to Tony, who was sitting in the passenger seat, and then returned to his main driving seat. Seeing Sherlock's appearance, Tony nodded with satisfaction, took a sip of coffee, and then put away his playful expression and looked at Sherlock and said, "Okay, I've already taken care of SHIELD. I just said that you are a magical person I met by chance, but I don't know your true identity. They seem to be very interested in your magic. You should be careful recently. If you don't want to be entangled by those dogskin blasters, you'd better restrain yourself, especially their one-eyed director. You must be careful. He is not an easy person to deal with, and I have a hunch that the water in SHIELD is very deep. Try to stay away from them. Do you understand?" After hearing Tony's instructions, Sherlock was very happy. After all, with the help of Tony, an insider, Sherlock can be said to have saved countless troubles, especially now it is still the era of SHIELD. Seeing that Sherlock seemed to want to express his admiration and gratitude to him like a torrent of river water, Tony quickly waved his hand to interrupt Sherlock, and then asked the question he had always wanted to ask. "Where are you going, after packing so well?" Chapter 27, Returning Too Far. In the vast Gobi Desert, a raptor was running on the road. It was Sherlock who was preparing to experience the self-driving cross-country trip. However, Sherlock's expression at this time was not as excited as at the beginning. As for the reason, it was very simple. The originally planned spiritual journey alone turned into a trip for two people. "Let's travel, look at the legendary Iron Man and the co-pilot, Tony Shidake, who was wearing armor when traveling!" Exclamation mark. It had been 2 days since Tony stopped him at the door of his store, and dear Uncle Tony had been wearing armor for 2 days sitting in his co-pilot. Sherlock looked at Tony with disdain, who was using the projection in the armor to handle the group's business. His eyes were full of confusion. Finally, Sherlock couldn't help but complain. "I say, dear Uncle Tony, if you can't let go of your work, why don't you go back? Lying at home and watching the American Daddy show and drinking some ice cream is much better than sitting in my co-pilot wearing armor now." Tony was stunned for a moment by Sherlock's complaints, and then he opened the mask of his armor unhappily, gave Sherlock a big eye roll and said, "My dear nephew, it was you who insisted on experiencing some self-driving time travel. I don't object to you going on a trip. I also said to take a plane, but you refused. Then I compromised and said to get a motorhome so that I can watch the American Daddy show together at night, but you also refused. Now I'm worth hundreds of billions, and I'm sitting in the co-pilot of your broken pickup truck. What else are you dissatisfied with?" Listening to Tony's words, Sherlock really had a lot of old complaints in his mouth. He couldn't stand Tony anymore. He couldn't stand it anymore. "Tony big shit. Do you know what a self-driving trip is? Look at the RV you proposed. Can that thing be called an RV? Have you ever seen an RV with 18 wheels that can be bomb-proof? Also, we are here to travel. Why are you wearing your armor? Damn it, I don't even dare to take you into the town. Damn it, I just want to go to the town to experience the local customs and people, but I was welcomed by the mayor himself. Damn it, for a moment I didn't even know whether I was here to travel or to accompany you to look at investments. And the most important thing is, it's been 2 whole days. I haven't seen you take off your armor. Don't you go to the toilet? In such hot weather, aren't you hot? Which good person would go on a self-driving tour in armor?" Sherlock complained fiercely like a machine gun. I, Sherlock, have something to say, and not only do I have to say it, I have to say it in person. But it was obvious that Tony didn't care about Sherlock's complaints at all. Instead, he stroked his chin and thought for a while before saying, "Well, what you said makes sense. I should indeed develop a more portable armor. The current armor is a bit inconvenient. Jarvis, record this idea and I will start researching it when I get back. As for the problem of going to the toilet you mentioned, as a genius, I have already thought of this when I was designing the armor." After that, Tony pointed to the iron crotch of his iron armor and continued, "I had already thought about the long-term combat when I designed it. This can be folded up for my convenience. And because of the extreme environment, there is a purification device inside my armor. If I can't hold it in, I can solve it directly in the armor. The armor can automatically filter and turn it into pure water for drinking. And thanks to your magical potion, the way I solve the problem can also become more diverse." After saying that, Tony no longer hesitated. He put his hands on both sides of his pelvis, and with a slight force, a sound of waves came out, just like the sound of Lego being pulled apart. Tony directly took his hip axis from his body. The most amazing thing is that the hip axis in Tony's hand is still wearing the steel armor, and after the hip axis was taken off, Tony did not lose support and collapse on the chair. Instead, it was still normal, as if after taking off the hip axis, there was still an invisible thing supporting Tony's body, and even the functions of the armor were still intact. Sherlock's eyebrows jumped when he saw this. He finally understood what the entry on Tony's head meant. Entry, doll life entry effect. The user will become an extremely realistic doll time. 0 hours, 10 minutes and 8 seconds. So it's a doll life, just like turning into Lego. But the next second, Sherlock felt his blood pressure rise all of a sudden. Tony opened the car window on his own, holding his hip axis with both hands, and stretched it out of the window. The next second, Tony's face showed a comfortable expression. Sherlock felt his blood pressure rise when he saw this scene. While stepping on the brakes to slow down, he roared at Tony. "Tony, big shit. If you dare to pee on my car, I will never let you go." Tony seemed to have not heard Sherlock's threat. Outside the window was a deserted desert, and Tony was not afraid of being seen by others. After a while, Tony took his hip shaft back from the window, pressed it gently to its original position, and after a crisp bow sound, Tony's hip shaft returned to its original position, and there was no gap on the armor, as if Tony's removal of his hip shaft just now was an illusion. Sherlock hoped that this was an illusion. Tony's behavior in the past 2 days really broke all the filters Sherlock had about Iron Man before he crossed over. At this time, Sherlock felt that he was about to suffer from high blood pressure. If possible, what Sherlock wanted to do most at this moment was undoubtedly to beat up his dear uncle. "Give me back the Iron Man I saw in the movie." Unlike Sherlock, whose filter was shattered and who felt like he had no desire to live, Tony himself did not feel that there was anything wrong with his behavior, and he looked at the entry that was about to count down. When the countdown ended, a tube extended from Tony's armor, and Tony bit the tube without hesitation and took a sip. Watching Tony drink the potion, Sherlock frowned even more. After thinking about it, he said to Tony, "Tony, potions are not omnipotent. Antidotes can't always help you. You have to know that potions are also medicines. Medicines have drug resistance. If you drink like this, the effect of the antidote on you will become weaker and weaker. To be honest, you have time to waste with me here. Why not go home and study new armor or new element?" Tony just perfunctorily hummed in response to Sherlock's suggestion and didn't say much, but the next second, Tony's face changed drastically, and he said to Sherlock with a serious face, "Stop the car." Hearing Tony's words, Sherlock quickly stepped on the brakes. After the car stopped, Tony got out of the car without hesitation and closed the armor. Just when Sherlock didn't know what was going on, Tony left a message saying that he had something to do with Pepper and told Sherlock to go ahead and he would catch up. Before Tony left, Sherlock saw that the entry on Tony's head had changed. Entry, rubber life enlarge a certain part of the body every 30 minutes, changing every 30 minutes, the part is random. Entry time, 23 hours, 59 minutes and 1 second. As if he understood something, Sherlock slapped the steering wheel jealously and then picked up his phone and called his future Aunt Pepper. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28. What we saw along the way. God knows what Sherlock said to Pepper that day. Anyway, Tony never came back after he left. After waiting for a whole day, Sherlock drove away without any hesitation. Without Tony, Sherlock really experienced the fun of self-driving through. Sherlock also knew why Ford Raptor was said to be a treasure for self-driving through. With the blessing of the powerful American large displacement V8, this car can be said to be able to take you running, as long as you give it enough gas, regardless of whether there is a road or not. Not only that, in addition to the fun of the car, Sherlock also experienced the happiness of the rich. It can only be said that the rich really know how to play. No wonder so many rich people were addicted to driving the Raptor Tyrannosaurus Rex to run through before crossing. As long as this thing runs, it is really happy, especially for boys, who can't refuse such a feeling at all. Imagine driving a big Raptor on the flat Gobi Desert, stepping on the accelerator to the bottom. The powerful shock absorption and power make the vehicle seem to be running on the road. The smoke and dust that was raised had not even landed on the car before it was left behind. From a distance, it even gave people the feeling of charging on the battlefield alone. Which male creature could resist such a temptation? Especially humans, who have experienced thousands of years of the cold weapon era and have almost ingrained battlefield charging into their DNA. Anyway, Sherlock felt that he could not resist such a feeling and even became a little addicted to it. This feeling was not something that could be achieved by magic, and even the top-notch Iron Man armor on the technology side could not give Sherlock such a feeling. Moreover, thanks to the vast land and sparse population of the lighthouse country, there was no need to care about pedestrians or other vehicles at all. The feeling of just accelerator and no brakes made Sherlock feel addicted. Apart from such a happy feeling, the scenery along the way also fascinated Sherlock, although it was certainly not as shocking as the legendary Dooku Highway in the previous life. It was not as magnificent as the Sichuan Tibet line, but thanks to the small number of people and the large number of uninhabited areas, the forests, peaks, deserts, and neighbors along the way also made Sherlock feel a strong craving for self-driving through. Sherlock even concluded that, if you want to camp, then the forest is definitely the first choice. The fresh air and materials that can be seen everywhere are all unforgettable. Especially when I woke up the next morning, the thin mist in the forest and the fresh smell of soil were really unforgettable. If you want to step on the accelerator to experience the joy of crossing, then the next door is the best choice. The road is flat and the smoke and dust form a long dragon behind you. When the car window is opened, it makes boys excited. As for the desert, it is purely to enjoy the sense of conquering the sand dunes of climbing mountains. Compared with the desert, Sherlock still prefers the feeling of forests and Gobi. Of course, throwing out the beautiful scenery, the people Sherlock met along the way also left a deep impression on Sherlock. Especially the people in Florida, which is located in the Great Lighthouse Country, deeply implemented the words Sherlock saw before crossing. In Florida, you can be without money, but you can never be without life. That guy, the people and things Sherlock saw along the way, his imagination was so big, his behavior was so weird, Sherlock didn't even dare to talk about it, but if he talked about it, it would either be 404, or it would not look like something a normal human could do. Breaking into a house in the middle of the night, to shave a kitten into a Mediterranean hairstyle, and smearing peanut butter on his hands, to fight with a neighbor who was allergic to peanuts. After Sherlock understood the customs of this place, it was only a trivial matter. Even some criminals are weird among the weird. Sherlock saw with his own eyes that an old guy took off his clothes except for a pair of shorts at the door of a convenience store, and then went to rob the convenience store and asked the convenience store to call the police. After the police came, this guy just lay on the ground and waited for someone to arrest him. Sherlock, who was extremely curious, really didn't understand why this guy took off his clothes and went to rob, so he relied on the confusion spell. to pretend to be a reporter and interviewed this guy. The reason given by the brother was also very powerful. Jai included food and accommodation. He didn't want to go to work and wanted to eat a bite of the government's food. As for the reason for taking off his clothes and robbing the convenience store, it was simple. It just proved that he had no weapons. Sherlock could be said to have listened to the self-narration of this brother with a strong style with the expression of an old man on the subway, and then decisively left and got on the car and ran away. God knows if he will become weird if he hangs around here. Based on the principle of defense, Sherlock did not hesitate to yo-yo directly. In addition to Florida, where the folk customs are simple, the second most impressive thing for Sherlock is Texas, known as the Lone Star Republic. If Florida is simple, then Texas is wild. That guy, if he doesn't agree with something, he will really take out a gun and do it, especially in rural towns. Of course, wild is wild. Sherlock still prefers this strong cowboy culture. After all, the American TV series Yellowstone in his previous life impressed Sherlock. When it comes to the lighthouse country, the most famous cultural symbol is also the cowboy. Cowboy culture is everywhere in Texas, and Sherlock was amazed by all kinds of cowboy competitions. Apart from other things, the American IAI of the cowboys in the competition was enough to shock Sherlock. Damn, 2 shots were fired in a few tenths of a second, and both hit the target. Even the sound sounded like a single shot. This thing seemed no different from magic to Sherlock. There was also the magical lasso. Sherlock learned it for a long time at a rally, but couldn't figure it out. Others threw it in a circle, but when it was Sherlock's turn, it was a stick every time. This also made Sherlock laughed at by those old cowboys for a long time. Of course, they didn't mean any harm, and even invited Sherlock to have a drink at the end. Of course, there are people who are not good at something, and there are people who are good at it. Sherlock's long gun rapid fire shooting skills also impressed the old cowboys. After all, such speed and accuracy show that Sherlock has undergone a lot of training, and cowboys never laugh at people who work hard. Apart from these, the most uncomfortable thing for Sherlock is those wild cowgirls. Sherlock was really not good at dealing with these wild women, and every time he could only run away with a red face amidst the laughter of the crowd. Texas was also the place where Sherlock had stayed the longest so far in this journey. Next, Sherlock had planned to go through Mexico to Yellowstone Park in Ohio, then drive all the way to Hollywood on the west coast to have a look, and then return home. To end this long journey, Chapter 29 The Hammer Falls from the Sky. In a desert gobi in New Mexico, Sherlock played violent rock music, opened the car window, and howled while experiencing the joy of stepping on the accelerator. This feeling made Sherlock linger, and even for a time he almost forgot that he knew magic. He drove at lightning speed all the way. If he could bypass the town, he would definitely bypass the town. Unless the supplies were insufficient, Sherlock would never take the so-called road. Sherlock, who had just replenished gasoline and food from a town behind him, was in a state of irritability at this time. In order to get to the past park as soon as possible, Sherlock could be said to have completely liberated the irritable attributes of the Raptor. As the speed of the car increased, Sherlock's mood began to become more and more excited, and the rock music in the car began to become more and more irritable. However, in a place Sherlock didn't know, Asgard, far away in the distant universe, was undergoing a change. Their prince Thor was deprived of his divine power by the god King Odin. He even threatened to exile Thor to the earth. At this time, Thor was arguing with his father in front of the throne. But it was obvious that god King Odin had no intention of arguing with Thor. He just casually made a move, and Jarl, nicknamed Meow Meow Hammer, flew into god King Odin's hand. After issuing a magic ban on Meow Meow Hammer, Odin just threw it casually, and Meow Meow Hammer flew towards the Rainbow Bridge. Even Heimdall didn't react, and Meow Meow Hammer had already flown into the Rainbow Bridge. And Sherlock on the Earth naturally couldn't find Meow Meow Hammer, which had just flown out of the Rainbow Bridge in midair. He still had a posture of charging with the accelerator on the bottom, happy like a fairy. With Meow Meow Hammer Sherlock and Sherlock's charge, the distance between the two became closer and closer. Finally, in an instant, Meow Meow Hammer and Sherlock's Raptor had a cordial contact. Thanks to the characteristics of Meow Meow Hammer, the huge inertia of Sherlock's raptor could not shake Meow Meow Hammer at all, but this characteristic made Sherlock's raptor suffer. For a moment, the point where the Meow Meow Hammer landed just on the beam of the rear wheel at the moment it smashed through the rear bucket of the raptor. Under the combined effect of the raptor's huge inertia and the relatively stopped Meow Meow Hammer, Sherlock's pickup truck's rear bucket was torn apart. Even under the effect of the huge inertia, the Meow Meow Hammer tore Sherlock's car's rear bucket and threw it over his shoulder. Fortunately, Sherlock's reaction was relatively fast. At the moment the Meow Meow Hammer hit the rear bucket of his car, he subconsciously cast a wandless and silent spell to give himself a layer of shield. With the addition of the vehicle's airbag, he was not injured after all. Although he was not injured, the impact of that moment was enough to confuse Sherlock for a long time. After a long time, Sherlock slowly climbed out of the cab. Just one glance at Sherlock made him feel his blood pressure rise all of a sudden. The reason was very simple. His beloved car, the big raptor that took him across half of the United States, was basically broken into pieces at this time. Apart from the relatively intact cab, the ground was full of Sherlock's car fragments, and even the fragments of the tent that Sherlock had worked hard for several nights could be vaguely seen. Sherlock was so angry that he wanted to see what kind of thing could destroy his car like this. Damn, what kind of hatred could make people use missiles to attack a pure civilian like him? As an LSP, Sherlock even rejected those wild cowgirls who came to him. How could he provoke such a ruthless character? Fortunately, the missile did not explode. If it did explode, I guess it would not be just a simple case of a little confusion. Cursing and staggering to the landing point, Sherlock was stunned for a moment, because what appeared in Sherlock's eyes was not a missile or something like that as he thought at first, but a hammer, and it was a hammer that he was very familiar with. What the hell? Meow Hammer? The story of Thor has already begun. So, it was the old bastard Odin who smashed my car? As if he had confirmed something, Sherlock looked up at the empty sky, raised his hands, and made an international gesture. At %, and asterisk, at %, and asterisk, Heimdall, I know you can see and hear it. Please tell Odin, the old bastard, I at %, his mother, and asterisk, at %, and asterisk, at %, and don't pretend you can't see it. I know you can see it. I%, his MOTHER apostrophe S and asterisk, %, and asterisk. Heimdall stood at the entrance of the Rainbow Bridge and watched Sherlock send telegrams for nearly half an hour. The most important thing is that there was no repetition in this half an hour. The content was so dirty and the scale was so large that almost all the women in Asgard were almost touched by Sherlock. After a long while, Sherlock finally stopped sending telegrams. Heimdall, who was far away in the god's domain, couldn't help but touch the sweat on his forehead. He secretly sighed that this little guy was really good at talking. As for Sherlock's words, that he would pass them on to the god King Odin, Heimdall thought about it and decided to forget it. Not to mention whether he could remember Sherlock's full text. Even if he remembered it, Heimdall felt that there was no need to tell Odin. If he really told Odin, he might be so angry that he couldn't sleep. Not to mention that he couldn't sleep, he might even have to carry his precious gun to the earth to have a solo battle with this guy. It's not worth the loss. Well, it's not worth the loss. It's definitely not, because he was afraid that the god King Odin would know and vent his anger on him. Putting aside Heimdall's side, Sherlock was indeed tired of scolding. After all, he scolded for a long time, but there was no response from the top, which only meant that the face didn't seem to pay attention to this place. Gradually calming down, Sherlock looked at the Meow Meow Hammer in the center of the ruins. Sherlock remembered it clearly. Since it appeared in the movie, the surrounding products of this thing have been sold out. Sherlock even bought one at the beginning. Now that he has encountered the genuine product, Sherlock is determined to try it. When he came to the Meow Meow Hammer, Sherlock took a horse stance, held the handle of the Meow Meow Hammer with both hands, took a deep breath, and then moved his key to Danshan, followed by Sherlock's strength. Pooh well, Sherlock farted, and as for the Meow Meow Hammer, it was still motionless in the same place. Sherlock was not surprised at all. Just based on the half an hour that he just turned into a sprayer, the Meow Meow Hammer did not dare to recognize him. Sherlock still had this self-knowledge. Although he knew that the Meow Meow hammer would not recognize him, Sherlock still had a playful mood and took out his wand to try the levitation spell. Surprisingly, it really worked for Sherlock. Sherlock's spell successfully made Meowth hammer float. If Meowth hammer was conscious, even Meowth hammer itself would be a little confused. But Sherlock was not surprised at all. After all, according to Ancient One, his magic meant that his will was above the rules. Sherlock was not surprised at all that Meowth hammer could float. After decisively taking out his mobile phone and letting Meowth hammer float in his hand and taking a few photos, Sherlock carefully controlled Meowth hammer to return to its original landing point without even changing its position. After confirming it, Sherlock nodded with satisfaction and picked up the phone. "Hello. Insurance? I want to claim insurance. You may not believe it, but my car was smashed into pieces by a hammer that fell from the sky." Chapter 30 Coulson Takes Action, Part 1. Sherlock spent nearly half an hour explaining to the insurance company that he was not making fun of him, but that a hammer really fell from the sky and smashed his raptor to pieces. But the operator on the insurance side refused to believe it, and once thought that Sherlock was a young man who stole his parents' phone to play a prank. A hammer falling from the sky? If it was a misfiring missile that fell from the BD experiment, the operator would believe it. Even if Sherlock said that it was Iron Man that fell and smashed his car, the operator would believe Sherlock. Hammer? Haha, if I believe it, then I'm really a hammer. This is the most real thought in the operator's heart. Sherlock tried his best to persuade the operator, and he argued with the operator for a long time before he agreed to come and take a look. After all, no matter what was smashed, or whether Sherlock deliberately destroyed it, as a member of the insurance industry, as long as Sherlock reported it, it was necessary to go to the insurance company to confirm whether it was a fraud. Sherlock was relieved to hear that the man on the other end of the phone still didn't believe what happened to him, but agreed to send an investigator to investigate. Sherlock quickly reported his location, and even put on a helmet for accuracy, and reported the longitude and latitude through Jarvis, and then hung up the phone with satisfaction. After that, it was a boring wait. As long as the insurance came and saw his beloved car that had been broken into pieces, Sherlock would definitely get the insurance. Although he was a little reluctant to part with his beloved car, when he thought that he could replace it with a new model of Raptor through insurance, Sherlock still felt that it was not a loss, and he was even a little happy. As for the time waiting for the insurance to come, Sherlock said that it was impossible to be bored, because he still had the Meow Hammer to accompany him. Although he couldn't lift the authentic Meow Hammer in front of him, it didn't prevent Sherlock from experimenting with his magic on the Meow Hammer. After a series of operations, Sherlock was surprised to find that some of his magic was not applicable to Meow Meow Hammer. Conceptual magic such as levitation spell and cleanup was not suitable for Meow Meow Hammer to resist. But when it came to physical magic such as blazing flames and cutting spell, Meow Meow Hammer was completely immune, although Sherlock tried to reduce the scope and power of the magic as much as possible to keep the scene as it was. After all, the insurance investigators in the Lighthouse country were comparable to Fobula. If there was any trace wrong, they would refuse to pay compensation. Sherlock didn't want to let the latest Raptor say goodbye to him, just because of his boredom. Of course, Sherlock didn't have the courage to test the more powerful black magic on Meow Meow Hammer. After all, there was only one of them. According to the plot, Thor still had to rely on Meow Meow Hammer to regain his divine power and restore his essence. Sherlock couldn't guarantee that if Meow Meow Hammer really couldn't withstand his black magic and was damaged, Thor, who was still a god of the hammer, could still defeat the destroyer sent by Loki like in the original book. Apart from these two types of magic, Sherlock also gained something. The biggest gain was that there was a replica of the Meow Meow Hammer that was created by copying it into two in Sherlock's library. Although this replica was just a high quality imitation of the Meow Meow Hammer, Sherlock touched it carefully and even felt that it didn't feel right, but as a collection, Sherlock was still very satisfied. In addition to this collection, what surprised Sherlock the most was that the Meow Meow Hammer could not resist his own transfiguration. Although the Meow Meow hammer would transform into the object Sherlock wanted according to his transfiguration idea, compared with other objects, the time that the Meow Meow hammer could maintain its transformation was undoubtedly more than half shorter. Moreover, for some unknown reason, the Meow Meow hammer could not transform into a living object. Every time Sherlock wanted to transform the Meow Meow hammer into a real Meow Meow hammer, it ended in failure. Not only that, Sherlock also discovered that, even if the Meow Meow hammer was changed in appearance by transfiguration, some of its own characteristics were still retained. Just like Sherlock still couldn't lift the Meow Meow hammer that turned into feathers. Despite this, Sherlock felt very satisfied. Imagine that when Thor was fighting, Sherlock suddenly turned the Meow hammer in Thor's hand into a little red flower. Although this little red flower looks extremely fragile, as if it will break in the next second, it is just like the real Meow hammer in Thor's hand, killing gods and Buddhas. For his own people, it is just a little funny, but for the enemy, it can be said to be extremely harmful and even more insulting. As long as Thor really makes Sherlock deform, then the Meow hammer will add 100% mental damage, while ensuring the original attack power, which is comparable to the torture of being sunk by the pippy shrimp and the netizens' jokes before crossing. After experimenting with magic, Sherlock lay on the ground bored, sunbathing, and imagining in his mind the appearance of Thor holding a little red flower and killing people in the New York War. Just thinking about it makes me feel that the picture is too beautiful and a little bit spicy. Just when Sherlock felt that he was about to fall asleep because of the warm sunbathing, Sherlock heard a very weak roar of an engine. After confirming that he had not heard it wrong, Sherlock sighed for his lost nap, sat up, and looked in the direction where the figure came from. A small looking vehicle appeared not far from the ground. The cream-colored body looked unusually mini, and the engine was roaring continuously. After Sherlock looked for a while, he was sure that the car that came was a beetle of a style that could be called an antique car. It was probably the insurance he had called just now. The beetle was not fast. After waiting for a long time, it came to Sherlock, swayed and stopped, and a big fat man comparable to Happy came out of the small compartment of the beetle. Sherlock was even afraid that when the fat man came out, the beetle would not be able to withstand it and fall apart on the spot. After a while, the fat man came to Sherlock while wiping the sweat from his forehead and stretched out his chubby hand to Sherlock. "Hello, I'm your insurance investigator Frankie Burke. This is my business card. I heard your car was smashed by a hammer." After Sherlock took the other party's business card, he pointed to the scene behind him one after another. Frankie Burke looked over, and just one glance at Frankie Burke's mouth twitched wildly. Damn it, I thought Sherlock was really playing an outrageous joke, but I never expected that the outrageous thing turned out to be reality. However, what's even more outrageous is that Frankie Burke couldn't pick up the Meow hammer from the ground after experimenting for a long time. This situation made Frankie Burke feel that it was really outrageous to the extreme. Chapter 31 Carlson Takes Action, Part 2. Just when Frankie Burke began to doubt his years of experience as an insurance investigator because of the hammer that he couldn't even lift, on the other side of the horizon, a team of Cadillac Escalades appeared not far away. The dust raised by the full-size SUVs quickly attracted the attention of Sherlock and Frankie Burke. In just a short while, the team came near Sherlock and parked neatly not far from the wreckage of Sherlock's vehicle. A group of black suits came out of the vehicle and began to be on guard around. Frankie Burke didn't understand what happened, but Sherlock knew the identity of this group of people. The reason was very simple. Sherlock saw an old acquaintance of his among the black suits, the village chief of the novice village, Agent Carlson, who had a worrying hairline. Carlson seemed to have seen Sherlock as well, and smiled as he walked up to Sherlock and said hello. "Nice to meet you again, Sherlock. We've met several times. You should know Phil Carlson." Unlike Frankie Burke, who was sweating profusely in the face of such a big scene, Sherlock seemed much calmer and stretched out his hand to shake hands with Carlson. "Of course, Agent Carlson, Uncle Tony was able to come back thanks to your help. By the way, how did you get here?" Facing Sherlock's question, Carlson's smile remained unchanged, and he answered Sherlock's question. "We detected a strong energy fluctuation near this area. While we were investigating, I received a message from headquarters saying that you were also nearby and your car was smashed by a hammer that fell from the sky, so we came to take a look. Although Sherlock had expected Coulson's explanation, he still narrowed his eyes slightly and asked back, as if he was a little unhappy, "Are you spying on me?" Seeing that Sherlock didn't seem very happy, Coulson hurriedly explained, "No, Mr. Sherlock, you misunderstood us. We will not monitor your daily behavior, but only report special situations. You know, since Tony was in danger last time, the people around him are on our priority list. Don't think too much, Mr. Sherlock, it's just to be on the safe side. After all, the incident with your uncle last time was really big." Of course, Sherlock didn't believe a word of Coulson's explanation. The suspicious character of Black Egg and Hydra together formed the Shield, which can be said to have a very low bottom line. Sherlock would not believe that they were just to prevent danger. I'm afraid that the greater probability is that Tony didn't find out who the magician who fought Ironmonger that night was, so they started to monitor the people around Tony. Fortunately, Sherlock and Tony basically don't discuss any issues related to Sherlock's vest on the phone, which makes the people of S.H.I.E.L.D. helpless. Nodding to Coulson expressionlessly, Sherlock didn't say much. Seeing that Sherlock didn't seem to want to deal with him, Coulson turned to Frankie Burke, who had been standing aside, and said, "Mr. Frankie Burke, I'm sorry, you can't reveal the photos of the scene to anyone. We need you to sign a confidentiality agreement. This matter has been classified as confidential." Coulson's words successfully aroused Frankie Burke's anger again. The chubby Frankie Burke looked at Coulson like a mad boar and said, "I'm sorry, sir, which department are you from? I don't think I can act according to your wishes. My employer, Mr. Sherlock's property has suffered losses. I need to bring back photos of the scene to help my employer, Mr. Sherlock, with insurance claims." Frankie Burke, an old hand, encountered such a situation more than once or twice. He even encountered a situation where his employer hired some actors to pretend to be related persons to defraud insurance. In the Lighthouse country, such a situation is not uncommon. After all, whether it is Fobbo or Langley's group of guys, they do have great power on some issues. Coulson was not surprised by what Frankie Burke said. He still smiled and showed his ID to Frankie Burke. "Mr. Frankie Burke, this is the ID I got from Bo. We will issue you a statement. You can use the statement to apply for insurance for Mr. Sherlock." Seeing that Coulson seemed to be fearless, Frankie Burke was a little undecided. He took Coulson's Bo ID, looked at Sherlock, who was still standing there with an expressionless face, and then continued, "Okay, I need to contact the headquarters to verify the authenticity of the ID. If what you said is true, then Mr. Sherlock will still get the compensation he deserves." After that, Frankie Burke ignored Sherlock and Coulson and ran to the side and started to make phone calls. Sherlock and Coulson just took a look and then stopped caring about Frankie Burke. Instead, Coulson looked at the scene with great interest and sighed to Sherlock. "Mr. Sherlock, judging from the traces at the scene, your accident can be said to be extremely tragic. You are really lucky. You are not injured at all in such a tragic scene." Cheyenne Coulson sighed, and Sherlock was still panicked, but soon, a bold idea appeared in Sherlock's mind, and he began to control it more and more. "No, my dear Agent Coulson, the reason why I was not injured is because I have some special medicines for special situations. The effects of these medicines vary, but without exception, the effects are extremely significant. It can even be said that as long as there is still a breath, it can be saved if there are enough medicines. It is also because of these medicines that I can keep my life, although the side effects of these medicines are a bit weird." Sherlock's words successfully attracted Coulson's attention. The two foxes had different thoughts, and Coulson looked at Sherlock with a surprised look and said, "Really? Mr. Sherlock, can you show me these potions? Your information doesn't say that you can make such potions." In response to Coulson's question, Sherlock must have thought of a solution, since he dared to say it for so long. He naturally took out a bottle of white moss potion and handed it to Coulson and answered, "Of course, Mr. Coulson, this bottle is one of the potions I made. It can quickly treat external injuries and won't even leave scars. As for why I made these potions, all I can tell you is that I saw them in a very old book. To be honest, I didn't believe it at first, but because of an accident, I had to believe that this thing was true. Oh, by the way, remember that the side effects of this thing are completely random. The side effects of the same potion will be different for everyone. Even after the side effects are over, the side effects will not be the same when using the same potion. Chapter 30 to Sherlock in a New Identity. Coulson was also skeptical about Sherlock's words, but the fact that Sherlock didn't have any injuries at all was a strong proof. Thinking of this, Coulson took the potion from Sherlock with a smile on his face. Seeing Coulson take the potion, Sherlock's smile became even brighter. Agent Coulson, this bottle is a gift. Your Department of Land and Logistics, let's call it SHIELD. If you want to purchase it, you can contact me, but the production of this thing is limited. I can't sell too much, and I only accept gold transactions. Looking at Sherlock's businessman's face, Coulson's eyes turned, and his face was still with that gentle smile, looking at Sherlock and said, "Of course, Mr. Sherlock, do you mind if we experiment on the spot?" Sherlock was naturally not panicked by Coulson's words, and made a gesture to Coulson to go ahead. At that moment, Coulson no longer hesitated and called an agent from SHIELD over. Sherlock took a closer look. Wow, it was a familiar face, the legendary Crossbones Brock Rumlow. He was very fierce in the comics, but he was just a minor character in the movie. But one thing had to be admitted, he looked really manly. After Coulson explained the effect of Sherlock's potion to Rumlow, he was also a ruthless man. Without any hesitation, he drew out a dagger and cut a small cut on his arm. Sherlock's eyebrows jumped when he saw such a ruthless style, and even Coulson was surprised. Rumlow obviously saw the expressions of the two people, smiled at them and said, "Don't be surprised. As field agents who have to face danger all the time, Mr. Sherlock's potion can be said to be a life-saving magic medicine for us. I'm just too excited. By the way, Mr. Sherlock, how should this potion be used?" Sherlock only twitched his mouth for Rumlow's explanation, secretly sighing in his heart that he was indeed a ruthless man in Hydra who dared to confront the captain, but on the surface he still looked normal, and said to Rumlow, "It's very simple, Mr. Ruthless, just pour a little bit of the potion on the wound. By the way, this bottle of potion has side effects. Although it won't hurt the body, the side effects of the potion, well, how should I put it? It's a bit weird, and it's not the same every time I use it." Rumlow obviously didn't care about Sherlock's words. He opened the bottle cap directly and poured the potion on the wound. Seeing that Rumlow didn't even frown during the whole process, Sherlock looked at Coulson beside him with his eyelids twitching. "Are all the people in SHIELD so cruel? Don't look at me, this is the first time I know this guy is so cruel." After the two of them quickly completed a wave of eye contact, they turned their eyes to Rumlow, who was testing the potion. When the potion came into contact with Rumlow's wound, a small bubble quickly appeared. Soon, the knife wound that Rumlow had just cut himself disappeared without a trace under the effect of the potion. But the side effects soon appeared, and the expression on Rumlow's face became extremely strange, as if he was looking at Sherlock thoughtfully. Sherlock was a little scared by Rumlow's look, so he looked at the top of Rumlow's head, and Rumlow's current state also appeared on his head. Entry, Unfallen Flag, cursed by the world, forced to produce effects, cannot be eliminated. Entry effect, flying bricks with great force, as long as you ignore some things, it is a man's dream and a woman's nightmare. Time limit, 24 hours, 59 minutes and 26 seconds. The moment Sherlock saw this entry, he understood why Rumlow looked at him with such a weird look, and could only smile awkwardly before answering. "Well, the effect is random, not what you think. According to the records in the book, some people even have the side effect of being able to control lightning after using the potion." Rumlow rolled his eyes at Sherlock's words, threw the potion to Coulson, and then left in an extremely weird posture. Looking at Rumlow's back as he left, Sherlock remembered to shout behind him, "By the way, Mr. Ruthless, the side effects last for 24 hours. Rumlow almost fell down after hearing Sherlock's words. He turned back and glared at Sherlock before turning around and leaving. As a level 7 agent of SHIELD, Coulson's observation ability was certainly not weak. He naturally noticed Rumlow's abnormality. looking at the potion in his hand. Even Coulson's mouth twitched. Sherlock, you mean that effect will last for a full 24 hours? In response to Coulson's question, Sherlock could only nod helplessly and repeat it again. That's right, the side effects last for 24 hours, and the effects are completely random. According to the records in ancient books, some people can get side effects comparable to superpowers, and some people's side effects are like that ruthless man, which are not painful or itchy. After listening to Sherlock's words, Coulson's face became serious, and he looked at Sherlock very seriously and answered his questions. Excuse me, who have you sold this potion to? Although Coulson's words were interrogative, in fact, there was no question in his expression or tone, but it was more like a confirmation. Sherlock was not panicking at all. Since he had decided to open a vest, he naturally had a way to deal with it. After thinking for a while, he answered Coulson's question directly. No one, except myself. I have only sold it to 2 people. One is my Uncle Tony, who needs an antidote, and the other person I don't know. He wears a black hood, which makes it difficult to see his face, and he can also use some magical powers. I don't know how he knew I had such a potion, but he came to me directly and bought a large number of potions from me. Fortunately, this guy is pretty good and gave me a lot of gold coins. As soon as Sherlock finished speaking, Coulson's face became visibly surprised. Just when Coulson wanted to continue to say something, Frankie Burke, who had made countless phone calls, came over from the side. He handed the certificate in his hand to Coulson and said, Agent Coulson, I have verified your identity, and the headquarters has agreed to your request. I will sign a confidentiality agreement later, and I would also like to trouble you to issue a statement, so that we can file it here. After that, Frankie Burke looked at Sherlock and continued. Mr. Sherlock, according to the content of the insurance, we can issue you 2 compensation plans. You can choose one of them. The first one is to compensate you with the same value as the vehicle, which is enough for you to buy a new Raptor. The second one is that we will purchase a new Raptor and send it to a nearby town. You can continue your journey, and we will not charge you a service fee, but you must guarantee to continue to renew the insurance with our company. I wonder which one you will choose? Listening to Frankie Burke's words, Sherlock chose the second claim plan without thinking. Anyway, he was not in a hurry. Since he caught up with the plot of Thor, he must see this middle-aged Thor with his own eyes. Coulson stood aside and watched Sherlock and Frankie Burke's conversation. It was obvious that he had nothing to say, so Coulson temporarily gave up asking Sherlock about the mysterious magician. After the 3 signed several agreements and contracts, Frankie Burke drove away in his old Beetle. It was not until Frankie Burke disappeared from Sherlock's sight that Sherlock remembered that he seemed to have no car and could only look at Coulson beside him awkwardly and said, Well, Agent Coulson, do you mind if I take a ride to a nearby town? Coulson had no reason to refuse Sherlock's request and immediately asked Drumlow, who had been sitting in the car because of the side effects of the potion, to send Sherlock away. After seeing Drumlow driving Sherlock and disappearing from sight, Coulson picked up the phone and made a call. Director, there is a new situation. Chapter 33 Conversation in the car. I woke up and found that the chapter was reviewed again. I'm really convinced. This is the revised one. Please read it first. Sherlock, who was already sitting in the car, did not know that Coulson had reported the matter of his potion to Black Egg, but even if he knew, Sherlock probably would not care. It was purely an accident that this trip could catch up with the plot of Thor. The reason why Sherlock exposed his special talent was also an idea that came to his mind. After all, not long ago, his wizard vest went to save Pepper and to fight Iron Man instead of Iron Man. The most important thing is that when he killed Iron Man, Tony did not stop him. It is impossible to say that his vest has nothing to do with Tony. S.H.I.E.L.D. must want to explore his true face under the vest, but unfortunately, his disguise is absolutely flawless. Except for his height and weight, it is simply a fantasy for S.H.I.E.L.D. to find evidence. He wanted to start looking for clues from Tony, but Tony fooled him very cleverly. Sherlock felt that, if he were S.H.I.E.L.D., he would first suspect the people around Tony, and he would be the number 1 suspect. Originally, this matter was not a big problem, but what Sherlock did not expect was that he was just traveling, and he could encounter the plot of Thor. He encountered it, and his phone was monitored by SHIELD. The final result was that SHIELD and the insurance were in place, and the scene of the group of rednecks fighting against Meow Meow Hammer in the original plot was disappeared without a trace. After thinking about it, Sherlock decided to expose the matter of the potion to SHIELD, and with the help of Thor's plot, he completely separated the two vests and let SHIELD have a headache. At least before Hydra was pulled out of SHIELD by Captain America, his vest must be covered tightly in front of SHIELD. Sherlock sat on the spacious backseat of the modified Emperor Yu Huan, looking at the scenery outside the window, while constantly perfecting his plan in his mind. As the driver, Crossbones Rumlow looked at Sherlock through the rearview mirror from time to time with a strange expression. Sherlock naturally also found Rumlow's expression with 3 parts of weirdness, 3 parts of anxiety, 3 parts of expectation, and 1 part of entanglement, and the overall expression was like a pie chart. However, the Hydra field officer did not ask him, and Sherlock was too lazy to explain to him. He still looked out the window, and kept thinking about the plot of Thor in his mind. To be honest, Sherlock, as a fun person, felt that since he had encountered the plot of Thor, if he didn't go to see the excitement, it would be a blasphemy to the spirit of fun people. It was also for this reason that he chose to wait for his new car in the town. If the plan went well, his car would be able to catch up with the plot of Thor fighting the destroyer after it arrived. If he was lucky, he might even go to Asgard for a stroll. And since we are talking about the destroyer, we have to mention Sherlock's little thoughts. Although Sherlock also likes the Meow Meow Hammer, it is helpless that this thing and Sherlock are not destined to exist. Even if he likes it, Sherlock can't take it for himself, and compared with the Meow Meow Hammer, Odin's destroyer armor is more Sherlock's favorite. According to Sherlock's guess, in addition to being able to fight alone, the destroyer armor is very likely to be an armor with amplification and protection attributes. After all, Sherlock heard before crossing that Odin, who is a father-level god, can compete with one of the gods in the group after wearing the destroyer armor. And the most important thing is that this thing may be made of the same material as a Meow Meow Hammer. That guy, that protective power, Sherlock has been envious for a long time. If it is really as Sherlock guessed, the material of the destroyer armor is the same as the Meow Meow Hammer, that is the Eurometal, then it can be said that the protective power and magic conductivity are full. Compared with these things, Tony's iron armor can be said to be a younger brother. But the most critical question is how to get the destroyer armor. After all, Sherlock is not Hela, who can crush the hammer with his bare hands, so naturally he has not thought about how to get the destroyer armor with full protection. Sherlock even feels that, even if he settles for the second best, he can get some fragments and practice his favorite weapons with the alchemy in Harry Potter. But how to get the fragments is also a problem. Should I use the nails of Hela, the Eurometal treasure? Damn it, the more Sherlock thinks about it, the more difficult it is. After thinking about it, Sherlock still made a decision that goes against his ancestors. Sherlock decided to try to use the side effects of the potion. If he is lucky, Sherlock will get a useful ability randomly, then Sherlock doesn't mind interfering in the plot of Thor. If not, Sherlock will think that he has no fate with this thing. But just thinking about the extremely bloody weight-bearing use of his potion, Sherlock feels that his teeth hurt a lot. Rumlow, who was sitting in the driver's seat, looked at Sherlock, who was sitting in the back seat, and whose expression began to change. He couldn't help but twitch his mouth, and then he spoke. "Mr. Sherlock, if you want to laugh, then laugh. To be honest, your medicine is useful, but I didn't expect this side effect." After hearing Rumlow's words, Sherlock woke up from his chaotic thoughts and looked at Rumlow in the driver's seat in surprise. After a slight pause, Sherlock realized that Rumlow had misunderstood him. Then he quickly replied, "You misunderstood, Rumlow. Mr. Agent, I was just thinking about something. No, it's not about you." After listening to Sherlock's words, Rumlow, who had not yet exposed his Hydra identity, was still easy to talk to. After a slight smile, he continued Sherlock's words. "Rumlow, Brock Rumlow, just call me Rumlow. Rumlow paused after introducing himself, looked down at his crotch, and then continued to ask with a tangled face. Mr. Sherlock, I want to ask, is it really impossible to eliminate the side effects of this thing? Such a useful potion, this side effect. Looking at the tangled expression on Brock Crossbones Hydra Rumlow's face, Sherlock's eyes turned, and he immediately began his own trickery. I'm sorry, Mr. Rumlow, this side effect is unavoidable. You should know that everything has a price, especially for powerful potions like this. Compared with the damage to the body, my small side effect can be said to be nothing. Sherlock paused before continuing. And according to the records in the ancient book I read before, this so-called side effect can be said to be all kinds of strange. If you are lucky, you can even get 24 hours of power comparable to that of a god. If you are unlucky, well, you should have known it. Chapter 34 Life in the Magical Salty Fish Town, Part 1. Sherlock had fooled Rumlow in the car. There was no recording equipment in the shield vehicle, so Sherlock didn't believe it at all. He said these words to both Hydra and Black Egg. Sherlock only planned to sell 3 kinds of potions to S.H.I.E.L.D. The White Moss Potion for trauma, the Antidote for detoxification, and the Polyjuice Potion for transformation. The amount of Polyjuice Potion was the least, and according to Sherlock's plan, it was a number that could be counted on one hand. The other 2 potions, although not as rare as the Polyjuice Potion, were not many either. In short, things are more valuable because they are rare. This also made it easier for Sherlock to make a lot of money from S.H.I.E.L.D. and those side effects that were uncertain, whether they were hero level or bear level, could also persuade Hydra, who was still seeking stability, to retreat. As for Black Egg, Sherlock always believed that Black Egg would definitely care about his potion, and might even oppose it. The appearance of Thor was the trigger of this incident. The mysterious gods, plus the weird wizard in Sherlock's vest, made Harry Luden worry too much about whether Sherlock's potion would really have those side effects comparable to those of gods. What's more, putting aside other things, the effects of those potions themselves were enough to make Harry Luden care about himself after experiencing Thor's experience. Only in this way can Sherlock firmly establish the pharmacist's vest. Back to the present, Rumlow, who was almost fooled by Sherlock, couldn't wait to drive back after leaving Sherlock at the edge of the town. As an outworker, he began to feel a pain in his head when facing Sherlock's 9 truth and 1 false fooling method inherited from Uncle Ben's Han in the previous Life's Spring Festival Gala. When he was in the car, Rumlow even began to regret that he didn't read enough when he was young. Looking at Rumlow, who disappeared in a flash, Sherlock couldn't help curling his lips standing on the outskirts of the town. He hadn't even started to ask about Rumlow's family situation, so why did he run away so impatiently? With this combat power, it was too much worse than the aunties at the entrance of the village in his previous life. Seeing Rumlow driving the Yellow Emperor and disappearing in the distance, Sherlock no longer bothered about the affairs of S.H.I.E.L.D. and turned around and walked towards the town leisurely. The town looks like a very typical western town, a typical redneck town. The town is not very big, but it has everything. All the necessary supporting supplies are available in the town. Sherlock is very satisfied with the configuration of the town. He found a hotel and checked in. There are not many tourists in the town, so accordingly, the hotel is not very big, but it is clean and has a feeling of a western cowboy movie. Sherlock is very satisfied with the place where he lives. After determining where he would live in the past few days, Sherlock sent his address to the contrasting on-site investigator of the insurance company, and then locked the door, and prepared to go out to satisfy his hunger. In a place like this in the countryside, most of the food in the small restaurants is meat-based, and most of them are family workshops, and there are not so many chain companies. Naturally, the taste is much better than those chain fast food restaurants. After Sherlock casually ordered a few special dishes that he was looking forward to on the menu, he leisurely watched the TV in the small restaurant to kill time. When Sherlock was watching the report on the TV about Tony, who was doing good deeds everywhere, Sherlock's cell phone rang unexpectedly. Puzzled by the words shit-sized on the caller ID, Sherlock slowly answered the phone. "My dear nephew, I heard that your journey was interrupted by a hammer that fell from the sky, and you were entangled by those tough guys from S.H.I.E.L.D. Just after answering the phone, Tony's gloating figure came out of the phone. Sherlock rolled his eyes in annoyance and then complained. My dear uncle, you are well informed. Can I ask where you heard the news? As for the tough guys you mentioned, unfortunately, I tell you, they might be listening to our conversation now. Listening to Sherlock's words, Sherlock could feel that the other party was obviously stunned for a moment, and then Tony's figure came out of the receiver. Monkey fuck. That worthless Nico actually tapped my phone. Jarvis, remember to encrypt my phone from today on. I don't want my private life to be exposed to that guy who talks a lot of Marxist philosophy. Sherlock listened to Tony's foul language for about 5 minutes in the receiver. Seeing that the dishes he ordered were being served one after another, Sherlock looked at the restaurant and saw that there were not many people. He then turned down the volume of his phone and turned on the speaker, ready to eat with the sound of Tony's broken defense. After a while, Tony stopped his foul language and asked Sherlock in a low voice, "Are you still there?" Sherlock calmly swallowed the food in his mouth and then answered slowly, "Of course, my dear uncle, your angry look just now is very appetizing. I even feel that the food I just ate is a little more delicious." Hearing Sherlock's words, Tony's defense was broken again. After about 5 minutes of confrontation with Sherlock, Tony announced that he had lost this round. After playing around, Sherlock remembered to talk about some serious matters, so he asked, "No more playing, let's get back to business. How did you know that my car was smashed by a hammer? If nothing unexpected happened, the insurance investigator should have signed a confidentiality agreement with the guys from S.H.I.E.L.D. under the name of Fobbo." Hearing Sherlock's question, Tony, who had lost because of his verbal battle, quickly became excited again, and then he answered proudly, "It's very simple, because that insurance is one of my industries. Besides, no one can refuse Stark's good-intentioned inquiry." This time it was Sherlock's turn to break down. After using the Marxist theory of his previous life to satirize Tony, the damn capitalist, for nearly 5 minutes, Sherlock was finally satisfied. After Sherlock finally shut up, Tony's voice came from the phone. Okay, let's talk about business. Tell me, is that hammer really as magical as the insurance investigator said? It can't be lifted at all. Just when Sherlock was about to say something to get rid of the curious Tony, Sherlock suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking. Before Sherlock could react, a blonde sturdy man had already grabbed Sherlock's shoulders and began to shake him hard. "Are you serious? A hammer that can't be lifted, and it fell from the sky? Tell me, where is that hammer?" If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35, Magic Salty Fish's Small Town Life, Part 2. For a moment, Sherlock even felt that his brain was about to be shaken evenly, and he couldn't even see who was shaking him. He could only vaguely see a hint of blonde hair. Fortunately, the strong man and Sherlock were not the only two people in the small restaurant. The strong man's companion saw that something was wrong and rushed up at a very fast speed to pull Sherlock and the strong man apart. Sherlock finally saw the strong man's appearance. "Well, how should I put it, Zhu Jinjiang? It's you." That's right, the one who almost shook Sherlock's brain was our famous Mr. Zhu Jinjiang's half-brother twin brother, our famous hammer god Thor. Sherlock originally wanted to walk around the town after he finished his meal to see if he could find Thor's trace, but he never expected that Thor would come to him on his own. What is this? After searching everywhere for something, it was easy to find it. The second-year version of the hammer god that is fully automatically delivered to your door. Sherlock looked at Thor, who was pulled away and stood in front of him with an extremely strange expression. After being pulled away, Thor obviously calmed down. He looked at Sherlock's expression and didn't show any disgust. Instead, he asked in an unusually cool way, "Mortal, do you know me?" Tony obviously heard the situation on the phone and asked anxiously, "What's wrong, brat? What happened?" Sherlock took a deep breath and his brain started to deal with the situation in front of him. First, he simply perfunctorily dealt with Tony like a scumbag. Then, despite Tony's foul language, He hung up the phone directly and then looked up at the two women and the old man who were holding Thor. The three of them all had an apologetic expression and kept winking at Sherlock. Although he didn't know these three people, Sherlock quickly understood what they wanted to express from their eyes. This is a psychopath. Don't be like him. Sherlock gave the three people a reassuring look and then looked at Thor, who was still quite excited, and answered, "I'm sorry, sir, I don't know you. As for the hammer you want to know, all I can tell you is that he is not far to the east of the town." Sherlock's answer was neither humble nor arrogant, and there was not much fluctuation in his tone, but Thor, who got the information he wanted, was still very happy. He completely ignored the expressions of Sherlock and the three people around him, and patted Sherlock's shoulder excitedly. "Very good, mortal. You have successfully gained the friendship of me, Thor, the god of thunder. When I get my hammer back and regain my divine power, I can agree to one of your requests." After saying that, he turned around and strode towards the door of the restaurant. The beautiful woman and the man behind Thor rolled their eyes together, and Sherlock could clearly see that the girl who looked like Maximum into Broke Girls had a WTF on her face. He looked at the food on the table that had been quietly taken a few bites, and then looked at his companions who were chasing Thor out. After thinking again and again, he grabbed a donut on the table and stuffed it into his mouth before rushing out. Looking at such a dramatic scene in front of him, even Sherlock, who had been mentally prepared, couldn't help but twitch his mouth. In this moment, Sherlock understood why Odin exiled Thor to Earth. Sherlock even understood why Loki wanted to usurp the throne. Apart from anything else, if Thor still looked like he was in the late stage of his second year syndrome, and Asgard was really passed on to Thor, it would probably not be long before Asgard was destroyed. Rubbing his shoulder that was hit by Thor just now, Sherlock secretly decided that he would definitely take revenge in the future. Then he shook his head and turned around to finish the unfinished meal. As for Thor's solo break into S.H.I.E.L.D., Sherlock said he didn't have much idea. At most, Thor's frustrated roar could barely be considered a famous scene, and the rest were just some action scenes. If he had that much free time, he might as well go back to the hotel early to study the alchemy in the library. And by the way, study which potion can have a high probability of getting the side effects he needs. Just as Sherlock was eating and thinking about his next plan, a slap hit Sherlock's back again without any preparation. Caught off guard, Sherlock was almost killed by this slap. After coughing for a long time, he coughed out the food that almost choked him to death. Sherlock turned around angrily and looked at the person who had just slapped him. Well, it's still the hammer god Thor in the late stage of the second year disease. Thor ignored Sherlock's angry eyes and still looked at Sherlock with the appearance of a late stage second year disease, without any intention of apologizing for his behavior just now. "Mortal, there is one more thing. The great Thor needs to know where to get a horse for traveling." Before Sherlock could get angry, Sherlock saw Thor's girlfriend Jane yelling outside the window through the glass window of the small restaurant and kept waving to the side. Then the two bankrupt girls Maximum, the old and strong Shavig, and Jane Foster rushed into the restaurant again. The three of them locked Thor's throat, carried him, and dragged Thor out of the restaurant with all their hands and feet. Even after catching Thor out, Jane Foster did not forget to return to the restaurant, apologized to Sherlock, and paid the bill for him. Looking at the four people leaving, Sherlock felt that he was holding back a belly of anger. "Very good, Thor. You have successfully aroused the anger of a magician." Sherlock no longer wanted to continue eating, turned around and stood up, and walked towards his hotel. Damn it, Sherlock didn't want to get involved in the plot of Thor getting the hammer. But now, facing the two slaps on Thor's face, Sherlock felt that it was time to let Thor experience what it meant to be a villain's revenge from morning till night. Damn it, if I don't show my power, do you think I'm Hello Kitty? If Sherlock doesn't break Thor's defense against him, he will write his name backwards. After quickly packing up his belongings, Sherlock found an empty alley as quickly as possible, and the Elder Wand appeared in Sherlock's hand in an instant. Not even bothering to disguise himself, Sherlock directly cast an invisibility spell on himself. Looking at his body, that gradually became transparent, the smile on Sherlock's face began to become gradually perverted. Chapter 36 Sherlock's Revenge. With a crackling sound of space distortion, Sherlock's figure suddenly disappeared in the quiet and deserted alley, but the next second, Sherlock returned to the original place with a black line on his forehead, and even his position had not changed. As for the reason, it was very simple. Sherlock didn't know Jane Foster's address, so he naturally didn't know where Jane Foster took Thor, the god of hammer. Sherlock's expression was extremely uncomfortable. After all, he had experienced a failed apparition. It felt like squeezing his body into a narrow rubber pipe and moving forward quickly. After squeezing to the end of the pipe, he found that the end of the pipe was blocked by iron mesh. Either it was broken into pieces by the wire mesh and appeared in various places, or there was only one way to return to the original place. Sherlock naturally couldn't choose to be broken into pieces, so there was only one way to return to the original place. Very good, my dear Thor, the hatred between us has deepened again, Sherlock said viciously, and drew a positive word for Thor in the little notebook in his heart. Don't ask why it was not a positive word, just ask Sherlock is happy. Although he didn't know where Thor had gone, Sherlock knew where he would eventually appear. After all, Thor couldn't resist the temptation of the hammer at the moment, so he didn't hesitate at all, and disappeared from the spot with another apparition. When Sherlock appeared again, the scene in front of him had become the wreckage of his beloved car and the hammer that was still standing there, surrounded by a bustling group of agents. Fortunately, Sherlock was now in a stealth form, and no SHIELD agent discovered Sherlock. Sherlock couldn't continue to stand among these busy agents, so he carefully came to the periphery and began to wait for Thor's arrival. But it was obvious that Sherlock had miscalculated. He originally thought that Thor, as a reckless man, couldn't resist the temptation of the hammer at all, and would rush here directly after Sherlock explained the location of the hammer. But obviously, Thor didn't do that. Sherlock almost watched the group of SHIELD agents working for an afternoon to build a simple laboratory, and covered the wreckage of his car and the Meowth hammer in the laboratory. He also watched the group of field agents led by Crossbones drive away happily after finishing everything, leaving only some low-level agents with pistols as security personnel. Even the weather gradually changed from sunny at the beginning to cloudy, and even when the sun set, it began to drizzle, and there was a trend of gradually getting heavier. Sherlock also changed from wanting to let Thor experience what it means to be Avalane's revenge from morning to night to finding an opportunity to give Thor a big one. Seeing that the sky was getting darker and the rain was getting heavier, Sherlock could only hold up a small piece of mirror space as a cover and rainproof measure, and still nailed to the spot. Sherlock didn't believe that Thor would give up his Meowth hammer so easily. As it turned out, Sherlock's guess was not wrong at all. When the rain reached its heaviest, Sherlock could vaguely hear the roar of a car engine in the distance. With the help of magic, Sherlock could see that the driver was Jane Foster, who looked nervous, and the person sitting in the passenger seat was Thor, whom Sherlock had been thinking about. Sighing that Thor had finally come, Sherlock's smile began to become more and more perverted. Without any hesitation, he took out his own copy of the Meowth hammer from his library and weighed it in his hand. Sherlock, who felt that the hammer felt perfect, put another layer of illusion spell on his hammer, and then looked at the SUV not far away. Thor, who had changed his clothes, was talking to Jane Foster, who looked nervous. After a while, Thor closed the car door, leaving Jane Foster alone in the car, and strode towards the camp built by SHIELD. Sherlock naturally followed Thor carefully, and watched Thor knock down the two guards in charge with the excellent physical fitness of the Asgardians, and then he walked into the center of the laboratory. That is where the wreckage of Sherlock's beloved car was, and he saw his favorite Meowth hammer. Thor, with an excited face, completely ignored the wreckage of the car near the hammer, and like a pervert, he gently stroked every part of the Meowth hammer, and kept muttering something like his closest comrade in arms. Sherlock got goosebumps when he heard it, and it seems that you Asgardians are also very playful. After Thor finally finished reminiscing about his past with the Meowth hammer, he confidently put his hand on the handle of the hammer, and even had the look of taking back his own divine power on his face. Unfortunately, things did not go as Thor had imagined. No matter how hard he tried, or even how much he said, he still could not move the Meow hammer, or even make it move. In an instant, Thor seemed to have thought of something. He knelt on the ground in pain and howled. That no could make the listener cry and write an 800-word essay with extremely rich emotions. But obviously, none of this affected Sherlock. Seeing that Thor had already posed, Sherlock no longer hesitated and aimed at Thor's painful face with a smirk. He almost swung his arm in a circle and hit Thor in the face with a hammer. The next second Thor's painful wail came to an abrupt end. Under the huge emotional impact and Sherlock's knowing blow, Thor fainted on the ground with blood all over his face. Sherlock, who had avenged his great vengeance, casually threw his fake meow hammer into his library and disappeared from the spot with a phantom. As for whether Thor would have a concussion or something, Sherlock was not worried at all. First of all, Sherlock's counterfeit meow hammer was just a fake with a good appearance. Sherlock even guessed that it was very likely hollow and made of aluminum like his frame. After all, Sherlock did not understand Eurometal at all and did not disassemble the hammer to understand the internal or chemical structure, so it was impossible for him to really copy a meow hammer. Secondly, Sherlock did not forget that when Thor forged the Stormbreaker, he withstood the power of a planet. Sherlock thought that a mere face-to-face hammer was a small problem. Chapter 37, Thor and the Wizard's Small Town Life, Part 1. After giving Thor a face slam, Sherlock returned to the alley he left at the beginning with a relaxed look. It was not until Sherlock walked back to the hotel where he was staying that Sherlock felt a little scared. He seemed to be a little too arrogant. He actually did something under the nose of S.H.I.E.L.D. If the Black Egg or Hydra really knew that he could do magic, they would definitely stick to him like a dogskin plaster. At that time, unless he gave up everything he had now and ran to a place like Kamatage to hide. Otherwise, the Black Egg would definitely find various ways to make you voluntarily or forced to complete something. Sherlock silently repeated his goal several times, saying that he stayed here for the destroyer armor, not to make trouble. At the same time, he silently opened his perception to explore whether there was anyone around him monitoring him. Miraculously, Sherlock did not sense any peeping, and there was no surveillance personnel around his room. Despite this, Sherlock was still cautious. He set up a confounding spell in the room to make people think that he was just lying on the bed reading a book, and then he took out the pirated Meowth hammer that he had just used to hit Thor from his library. As expected, the pirated Meowth hammer had been suppressed for more than half of the time, and the place where it was suppressed was clearly printed with Thor's painful face, which looked like a painful mask growing on the Meowth hammer. Sherlock was so happy that he kept rolling on the bed. He thought that he had the strongest peripheral of Thor, the Meowth hammer, that he had personally used to hit Thor. After a while, Sherlock finally recovered and put the hammer into his library, intending to keep it forever. He casually pulled out a book on alchemy and lay on the bed, intending to read it for a while before taking a shower and going to bed. The next day, Sherlock slept until the sun was high in the sky, and then he got up comfortably to wash up and leisurely went to the restaurant to eat a meal that he didn't know whether it should be considered breakfast or lunch. It was amazing that Sherlock had just walked into the gate when he saw Thor and Jane Foster and their group again. This time, Eric Shalvig, a doctor of astronomy, was not with them. Only Jane Foster, the big bear girl from Two Broke Girls, and Thor were left. The two girls were comforting the depressed Thor. The three also noticed Sherlock coming in. The two girls greeted Sherlock with a little embarrassment. Sherlock naturally responded generously and even greeted Thor. It was as if it was not him who hit Thor with the hammer yesterday. As young people, they quickly got acquainted with each other. Until now, Sherlock knew that the name of the big-breasted girl from Two Broke Girls was Daisy Louise. After eating a meal together, they hurriedly separated. Sherlock didn't care. After eating the food he ordered, he got up and prepared to walk around the town again. The town is not very big. It only takes a short time for Sherlock to get a glimpse of the whole town. Similarly, this also means that there are few things to entertain in the town. In desperation, Sherlock walked into the only bar in the town. The bar is like many typical American bars in the lighthouse country, with some rednecks drinking inside. It is very lively, and Sherlock is not afraid of the stage. With his recent travel experience, he is quite popular among this group of people. The most popular one is Sherlock's experience in Florida. with the crouching dragon and phoenix chicks that can be seen everywhere, and the unique landform features. The original continent was dubbed the American Bull by this group of people in the bar, and they are still enjoying it. Sherlock is naturally among them, laughing with this group of people who were born and raised in the town, and he doesn't feel lonely at all. Until the evening, the lively atmosphere in the tavern began to gradually reach a climax. As the people in the town finished a day's work, people kept walking into this lively tavern. Sherlock never cared about it. He sat at the bar and tasted his beer, listening to the later people telling other jokes and laughing heartily, until a big hand patted Sherlock on the shoulder. Sherlock turned around in confusion and saw that the people who came were Thor, Daisy Louise and Jane Foster. Originally, the few people were familiar with each other because of the morning dinner. At this moment, under the influence of alcohol, the relationship between the few people was rapidly warming up. Thor kept telling the few people about what he saw and heard in Asgard. The few people listened with relish. After all, jokes are always jokes. It's good to make people happy. During this period, Jane Foster also told Sherlock about the recent situation of the few people. The Toledos were on vacation because their experimental equipment was temporarily requisitioned by SHIELD, and the doctor's astronomy research was suspended, and they could only do some paperwork. As for Thor, after experiencing the impact of not being able to lift the Meow Hammer, and with Jane Foster's guidance, Thor temporarily gave up the plan to return to Asgard. He planned to find a job in the town to support himself first. After all, Thor, as an Asgardian warrior, could not accept that he had to rely on Jane Foster to live. When he heard that Thor was looking for a job, Sherlock immediately said with a bad taste that he would help Thor. Although the three were puzzled, they saw Sherlock's enthusiasm and could not say anything. After that, they chatted for a long time before they went back to their homes in a daze. Sherlock did not use magic to dispel the alcohol in his body until he returned to the hotel. He carefully recalled his contact with Thor and Jane Foster. He sighed and said that Thor only had a more serious second-year disease. After all, in Asgard, where everyone has a second-year disease, Sherlock was not surprised by Thor's situation. Throwing out the second-year disease, Sherlock still felt that Thor could be a good friend, and even contacted him more, and occasionally found it very interesting. After all, apart from the Chuna bio, Sherlock found that Thor was just a simpleton and a fun-loving person like himself. The two of them were very similar in some aspects. Under Thor's influence, Sherlock even began to be curious about Askey, and began to think about whether he could find a way to sneak to Asgard for a stroll. But I'll talk about this after I finish my stroll on Earth. Chapter 38, Thundergod and the Wizard's Small Town Life, Part 2. The next morning, the door of Sherlock's room was violently opened by the sturdy Thor from the outside. The loud noise made Sherlock, who was doing something in his dream, wake up immediately. Looking at Thor calmly walking into his room, Sherlock was about to curse, but he saw Jane Foster's apologetic look behind Thor, and he could only suppress his anger temporarily. Jane Foster greeted Sherlock awkwardly, then hurriedly explained a few words to Thor, and left without stopping. Until Jane Foster left, Thor looked at Sherlock, who was still sitting on the bed wrapped in a quilt, and said apologetically, "Well, sorry, Jane is in a hurry about something, and I may have used a little more strength in a hurry. It would have been better if Thor didn't explain." Once he explained, Sherlock's anger was even more surging. "You are noble, you are great, and you are so anxious that you use my door to pick up girls?" Trying hard to resist the urge to take out his magic wand and shoot Thor, Sherlock drove Thor out directly. After quickly changing his clothes and washing up, Sherlock took Thor to compensate for the door of the room first, and then took Thor to find a job. Without much hesitation, the first place Sherlock took Thor to was the small bar yesterday. Looking at the bartender who had become familiar with him yesterday, he went up and asked if he wanted a Thai dancer. The middle-aged man who was the bartender and owner of the tavern naturally saw that Sherlock was joking at a glance, and nodded directly with a smile. It would have been fine if he didn't nod, but a nod scared Thor, and he grabbed his arm that could run a horse and wrapped it around Sherlock's neck without saying anything, and dragged Sherlock out of the bar. He was the Asgardian god of war, the son of the god King Odin, the god of thunder, and Sherlock actually asked him to dance a Thai dance. If his brother and his friends in Asgard knew about it, the picture would be too beautiful. Thor felt goosebumps all over his body just thinking about it, and completely forgot that there was no stage for Thor to perform in the tavern. Fortunately, Sherlock was just joking, and did not really intend to ask Thor to sell his body, although there was no place to sell his body, which Sherlock expressed great regret. After the two of them had a noisy breakfast, Sherlock really found a job for Thor, a clerk in a pet store. Looking at the picture of Thor, who was sturdy, wearing a pink apron, and carefully taking care of cats and dogs, Sherlock wanted to laugh, no matter how he looked at it. Thor was also stable with the help of Sherlock. Whether it was Jane Foster, Sherlock, or Daisy Louise, the lives of several people began to slowly settle down. During the day, Sherlock would read books, watch TV, or go shopping, and have a meal in the hotel. Daisy Louise and Jane Foster would continue their academic research together. Sol worked diligently to earn money, and carefully dealt with the pet owner's groping behavior. When it was night, several people would gather in the tavern, have a drink, and talk about what happened today. But slowly, Sherlock and Daisy Louise found something wrong. Sol didn't know when he started to flirt with Jane. As good friends, Sherlock and Daisy Louise naturally couldn't turn a blind eye to this matter. Based on the principle of being afraid of the brother's hardship and afraid of the brother driving a Land Rover, the two quickly formed an alliance, one responsible for Jane and the other responsible for Sol, and they must not let the two have any substantial progress. Daisy Louise just couldn't accept the fact that her friend was in love with an alien, and Sherlock just couldn't accept the fact that Sol, a fool, had a partner. But the two were just friends after all, not old mothers. Jane and Sol always found opportunities to be affectionate with each other, which made Sherlock and Daisy Louise extremely frustrated. One day in particular, it was the weekend, and the four of them agreed to drive Jane's stuff to play nearby. But when Sherlock and Daisy Louise arrived at Jane's door, when it was not Jean herself who opened Jane's door, but Sol, Sherlock and Daisy Louise looked at each other and knew that their alliance was useless. Daisy Louise was eventually stolen by Sol and lost Jane, and Sherlock, a single dog, was also stabbed in the back by Sol. Damn it, they clearly agreed to be single until death. Whoever gets out of single first is a dog. How could Sol and Jane betray their evolutionary friendship? In the end, under the offensive of Sherlock and Daisy Louise, Jane and Sol finally admitted their relationship, and the two of them completely confirmed their relationship as lovers. This also made Sherlock and Daisy Louise fed a mouthful of dog food and saw a trace of helplessness in each other's eyes. At one point, they were not interested in the rest of the journey. Later, Sol and Jane were flirting in the back seat, while Sherlock and Daisy Louise were chatting in the front seat. The two teams were doing their own things, and they were clearly separated. Even after returning, Sherlock and Daisy Louise left without saying hello to Jane and Sol. After all, they had been light bulbs for a whole day, and they both felt that they should not be in the car at this time, but should be under the car. Since Jane and Sol admitted their relationship, the days passed peacefully for 4 days. Finally, on the morning of the 5th day, Sherlock received very good news. The insurance company called him and said that his new Raptor would be delivered to the town this morning. For this reason, Sherlock looked forward to it for a whole morning. Finally, at noon, under Sherlock's expectation, a top-of-the-line, off-road modified latest Raptor was towed to the door of Sherlock's hotel by a flatbed truck. After a series of documents were signed, Sherlock looked at his beloved car with joy. Good things should be shared. Sherlock didn't even have time to tear off the film on the new car before Jane and Daisy Louise dragged him to the restaurant to celebrate. Thor came over after the three of them arrived at the restaurant and during the lunch break at the pet store. However, compared to the jubilant Sherlock and the other two, Thor's face was full of sadness. After several people's questioning, Thor finally explained the truth. This morning, his brother Loki came to see him. He learned from his brother that his father, Odin, the god king of Asgard, had passed away. Thor, who was deprived of his divine power, couldn't even go back to see his father for the last time. After learning about this, both Jane and Daisy Louise kept comforting the sad Thor. Only Sherlock knew that this was just Loki's conspiracy, and the final plot of Thor was about to begin. It looks like we have to make some preparations quickly, Sherlock thought to himself while comforting the silly Thor. Chapter 39. The grand drama begins. Although Sherlock knew that Odin was fine, he still did a good job on the surface and comforted the sad Thor. After Thor finally recovered from the grief of his father's death and began to make up his mind to live a good life on Earth and wait until he really got back his power and then find a way to return to the divine realm to pay tribute to his father, Sherlock spoke and gave Thor another fatal blow. According to Sherlock, the reason why he waited in this town was largely because he was waiting for his new car. Now that the car has arrived, Sherlock plans to make some potions on the next trip tonight. He told several people not to wait for him to eat at noon tomorrow, and everyone will get together in the evening. He will leave this town the day after tomorrow morning. Thor, who had just come out of the grief of losing his father, had not had time to recover before he learned the bad news that Sherlock was leaving. For a while, he behaved like a dog that was about to be abandoned. Jane, Daisy Louise and Sherlock all had goosebumps. Can you imagine the feeling of Zhu Jinjiang with Schwarzenegger's body crying in front of you? Thor feels almost the same now. In short, Sherlock and his friends finally persuaded Thor to accept the double blow of losing his beloved father and his friend leaving. After seeing that Thor was fine, the few people separated. After all, except for Sherlock, the rest of them still had work to do in the afternoon. Sherlock, who was walking slowly towards the hotel, also keenly discovered that some figures in black suits began to appear in the inconspicuous corners of the town. But compared to himself, Sherlock found that these people paid more attention to Thor and Jane. If nothing unexpected happened, it should be that the SHIELD group found some evidence that Thor was an alien in Jane's documents. After all, according to the style of black boiled eggs, just on Earth, he hated that nothing could happen that was beyond his control. Black broiled egg always had great malice towards those outside Earth. In this way, could Sherlock think that black broiled egg was a pure political theorist who discriminated against any creatures outside Earth? It seemed that there was nothing wrong with thinking so. While thinking about it, Sherlock returned to his hotel. After closing the door of the room, Sherlock's originally relaxed expression slowly began to become serious. He took out his wand and cast a confusion spell on his room, making it look like the people in the room were always sitting at the table and busy with something. Sherlock then sat on the bed and began to plan his next move. Logically speaking, he did not use the restoration spell to restore his beloved car, so naturally, Odin could not say much about his attack on Odin's destroyer armor. The problem now was just what kind of magic potion to use to get rid of a better side effect. After thinking it over again and again, Sherlock gritted his teeth and used his few golds to buy a bottle of healing potion. After all, Sherlock didn't believe that his luck would always be so bad. After doing all this, Sherlock turned on the TV leisurely, found a TV show he liked, and planned to go to bed early tonight to get enough energy to face tomorrow's war. The fact was just as Sherlock expected. Early the next morning, Thor had just arrived at the pet store and was about to start a new day of buying color when the sky above the town suddenly began to be overcast. In just a short while, the sky above the town became extremely dark. The next second, a huge beam of light instantly hit the town not far away. The people in the town and SHIELD didn't know what happened, but Thor, as an authentic Asgardian, could see it clearly. This was the appearance of the Rainbow Bridge opening. If nothing unexpected happened, there should be people from Asgard coming to his vicinity. Thor was very excited and came to the street in a hurry. The next second, 4 figures that were very familiar to him appeared in Thor's field of vision. 3 men and 1 woman were Thor's good friends in Asgard, or drinking buddies. Thor was very happy to see them coming. This was one of the few things that made Thor happy among the many bad things recently. He asked for a leave in the store without saying anything. He said he would take his good friends to experience the difference between the beer on Earth and the beer in Asgard. Of course, Thor would not forget his good friends on Earth. Jane, Daisy Louise and the doctor were all called by Thor. If Sherlock had not repeatedly told him that he needed to rest yesterday, Thor might have brought a large group of people to knock on Sherlock's door. After the 3 rounds of drinking in the tavern, the Asgardian quartet also brought Thor a very shocking news. That is, the god King Odin was fine, but just fell into a deep sleep. This news made Thor very excited. After all, anyone who knew that his father, who he had long thought had passed away, was still alive and well in the world and was just sleeping, would be extremely happy. But then, Thor also wondered why Loki had lied to him. As a simple and reckless man, Thor didn't know Loki's thoughts. But for now, it was obvious that his friends were the most important. Nothing was more important than entertaining his friends. Just as several people were toasting and drinking and were having a great time, the sky began to darken again, and a beam of light similar to the previous one landed exactly at the same place. Two consecutive huge energy bombardments even made some of the soil layers on the ground turn a little black. After the beam of light dissipated, a tall silver white figure gradually appeared. It was the destroyer armor that Sherlock had been thinking about. Such a big move naturally could not escape Sherlock's eyes. When the first beam of light from the rainbow bridge came down, Sherlock had already noticed it and began to decorate the room according to his plan. The confusion spell was changed to make it look like he was sleeping in bed. To be on the safe side, Sherlock even used transfiguration to create a fake version of himself, wearing headphones and lying on the bed. The dummy was no different from Sherlock, except that it couldn't speak and couldn't wake up. Even the breathing movements were perfectly restored under Sherlock's magic. After the disguise, Sherlock put on his equipment, put on his wizard vest again, and cast an invisibility spell on himself. He looked in the direction of the town in trance, as if expecting something. Seeing that the huge silver white figure that was destroying everything was becoming clearer and clearer, Sherlock's smile began to grow bigger and bigger. He took out the prepared potion and looked at the approaching destroyer armor and muttered softly, "The show is about to begin." Chapter 40, Sherlock Holmes, Part 1. Seeing that the destroyer armor he had been thinking about was getting closer and closer to him, Sherlock no longer hesitated and swallowed the Felicity potion in his hand in one gulp. With the entrance of the Felicity potion, Sherlock felt that the whole world became much clearer in an instant, and even some magic that he had not figured out for a long time was figured out in this instant. But the next second, the scene in Sherlock's sight began to become blurred, as if it was mosaiced, just for a short while. The world in Sherlock's eyes became a paradise of cubes and mosaics. Not knowing what happened, Sherlock hurriedly checked what the weight of his bottle of magic potion was. Entry, block revolution entry effect. Have you played MC? Boy, now you also have all the abilities of Steve. Go to revolution, and the whole world will eventually be ruled by cubes. Entry time: 23 hours, 59 minutes and 9 seconds. Looking at the explanation of the entry in front of him, Sherlock was sweating and speechless. For some reason, his entry began to behave more and more like a middle school student. But putting aside this small problem, Sherlock was very satisfied with the performance of this entry. He, an African, finally got lucky. After all, he was Steve, who could make everything with his hands. With Steve's ability, Sherlock was confident that he could roll the destroyer armor into a cube and then put it in his library. Sherlock felt that, even if Odin came in person, he would not be able to take the destroyer armor away. At that time, he could study the forging alchemy from the dwarves and combine it with the alchemy in Harry Potter. He would definitely be able to make a set of his own armor. After all, think about how Benedict Cumberbatch could transform into a combat form by just throwing a scarf in the later period, and Tony could complete the transformation with the nano armor by just patting his chest. Sherlock didn't want to be the only one who needed to put on his own equipment one by one. That was not cool at all. Sherlock also wanted a handsome transformation. After all, no male creature could refuse a handsome transformation, and this applied to any age group. Sherlock, who had made all the preparations, disappeared in his room with the sound of space distortion. When Sherlock reappeared, he was already standing on the roof of the house very close to the battlefield. The invisible Sherlock did not attract anyone's attention, but the high-profile destroyer armor was not like that. The moment he walked into the town, he attracted the attention of the Asgardian Four and Thor. Knowing that Thor had lost his divine power, the Asgardian Four stood up to stop the destroyer armor from moving forward. As Thor's friends, although they all knew the power of the destroyer armor, they did not retreat at all. The only female in the group of four gave the remaining three a look, and then quickly took a detour to cut off the destroyer armor side road. The remaining 3 men were not fuel-saving lamps. In the years of fighting with Thor, they had already cultivated an extreme tacit understanding. 2 relatively thin guys rushed over immediately, stopped not far from the destroyer armor, and just waved to the back. The bearded man standing behind with a battle axe in hand began his charge. The moment the bearded man approached the 2 men, they grasped the bearded man's body in tacit understanding and threw him towards the destroyer armor with all their strength. With the assistance of the 2 men, the bearded man flew towards the destroyer armor like a cannonball, and the battle axe in his hand was also raised high by the bearded man, just waiting to give the destroyer armor a blow. But it was obvious that several people underestimated the bravery of the destroyer armor. The bearded man, who was as fast as a cannonball, was no different from slow motion in the eyes of the destroyer armor. He just raised his foot and kicked the flying bearded man into a car. Before the bearded man could react, he casually knocked over the remaining 2 men who rushed to support him, came to the bearded man, and opened his visor. In an instant, the flames full of destructive characteristics began to brew inside the destroyer armor, and the bearded man's face began to show a look of fear, but the next second, the fear on the bearded man's face turned into pride. The reason was very simple. The female warrior who cut the side road finally arrived at the battlefield. She jumped high, and, with the help of her own gravity, the spear in her hand instantly pierced through the back of the neck of the destroyer armor. She nailed the destroyer armor directly to the ground. With the best output of the female warrior, the destroyer armor seemed to be seriously injured, and the flames inside the armor disappeared without a trace in an instant. Seeing that the attack seemed to work, several people showed excitement on their faces. But before they could be happy for too long, the destroyer armor, which seemed to have lost power, started again, and the armor plates on its body began to rotate continuously, and the whole body changed from leaning over to lying on its back at a very fast speed. And the flames in the armor began to gradually become vigorous. The face of the female warrior standing on the destroyer armor changed immediately, and she dodged the flame spray of the destroyer armor with a flash, and the bearded man lying on the front of the car also quickly moved away from the destroyer armor. At this moment, Sherlock suddenly appeared, wearing his large wizard equipment, and appeared behind the destroyer armor with a distortion of space. He stretched out his evil hands, and placed them on the arm of the destroyer armor, and began to rub them quickly. The sudden appearance of Sherlock and Sherlock's strange movements made the entire battlefield stagnate, and even the powerful destroyer armor and Loki who controlled the destroyer armor were a little confused. No one understood what this person who suddenly appeared was doing, but the next second, accompanied by a sound like a balloon bursting, the arm of the destroyer armor seemed to shrink countless times in an instant, and fell directly to the ground. It was not the kind of falling directly to the ground, but it fell to the ground and slowly floated and turned, just like a product in a display cabinet. Sherlock did not hesitate at all, waved his wand, and the 2 arms that had shrunk countless times were grabbed by Sherlock in an instant, and then accompanied by a sound of distortion of space, Sherlock disappeared from the battlefield again. Sherlock, who came and went in a hurry, completely disrupted the situation on the battlefield. The destroyer armor, which had lost its arm, was stunned for a moment, and then seemed to be enraged. It straightened up in an instant, and began to attack the Asgardian group of 4 frantically. Chapter 41, Sherlock, the Magic Thief, Part 2. While the Asgardian quartet was being beaten, what was Sherlock doing? He happily found a deserted place, and hid in his library, to study the arm of the destroyer armor. Although Sherlock still saw the destroyer as a square-shaped arm, it did not prevent Sherlock from studying it. In just a short while, Sherlock roughly understood the general principle of the destroyer armor. This thing was similar to Thor's storm axe, and the magic runes were engraved in the armor when it was forged. The difference was that the destroyer armor was composed of pieces of armor, and as armor, it did not have such high requirements as weapons. It was because of this that Sherlock could clearly see the alchemical runes inside the empty armor. Fortunately, Sherlock had made up a lot of knowledge about alchemy. Although he did not know the meaning of all the runes, Sherlock still roughly understood the role of those runes, energy conduction. And the most crucial point is that the alchemical runes and magic runes used by the dwarves to forge weapons for Asgard have both similarities and differences with the Harry Potter world. This is what makes Sherlock feel itchy the most. No magician can refuse new knowledge or new applications of old knowledge. Sherlock, who originally planned to just steal some materials to do alchemy himself, decided immediately under the stimulation of curiosity that he would definitely get the entire High Destroyer armor back no matter what. Even if he couldn't get all of it back, he had to get the built-in energy core back. Sherlock had a hunch that this energy core would be a very useful thing for him. After making a decision, Sherlock no longer hesitated and immediately left his library and returned to the edge of the battlefield. But when Sherlock returned to the battlefield, he found that Thor had already taken back his divine power. He was waving the Meow hammer in the air to gather the power of thunder to cosplay the role of a helicopter. Sherlock, who knew the plot, immediately changed his expression. The reason was very simple. Sherlock knew that in just a short while, Thor, the prodigal son, would beat his father's destroyer armor into scrap. With a roar, he hammered down the armor. Sherlock immediately used apparition to appear behind the destroyer armor and stretched out his evil hand towards the destroyer armor. Well, due to his height, when Sherlock stood on the same level as the destroyer armor, he could only reach the position below the chest of the destroyer armor. Because of this, Sherlock wanted to rub off the entire destroyer armor. The best way was to rub it from the buttocks upwards. Although that's what he said, this action, well, can only be described as obscene. It can even be said that apart from the extremely obscene back rubbing service of Sherlock in Japanese specialties, few people in the real world have seen such obscene actions, unless it is in the bedroom. Whether it was the spectators from S.H.I.E.L.D., Jane, Daisy Louise, and the Doctor, or even the seriously injured Asgardians, their faces became extremely strange. Even Thor, who was originally solemn in midair, began to look strange. For a moment, Thor even began to doubt whether he should disturb the destroyer armor and the pervert below. In the entire battlefield, the only two people who didn't feel anything were probably Sherlock and the destroyer armor as the plaintiff, or Loki who controlled the destroyer armor. After all, Loki's full attention was on his good brother, Thor the Hammer God, and he didn't notice Sherlock who was behind him and playing with the destroyer armor. But soon, even if Loki didn't want to notice it, he couldn't, because with 3 consecutive bangs, the helmet, chest armor, and iron pants of the destroyer armor became the same state as its arms under the friction of Sherlock. Loki immediately lost control of the destroyer armor, as if the connection had failed. It was shrunk several times and fell down, and it was suspended on the ground, and kept rotating like an exhibit in a display cabinet. Sherlock quickly took the fallen armor and the remaining 2 thighs into his library. When Sherlock took off the armor, Sherlock also found the location of the energy core of the destroyer armor. Damn, I don't know if Loki's level is not good enough, or it was set like this when forging. The core energy of such a tall and mighty armor is actually in the iron pants of the armor. When putting the armor into his library, Sherlock even maliciously imagined what Odin would look like when wearing the destroyer armor. To be honest, wouldn't he be afraid of being burned? Sherlock seemed to understand a little bit why Odin was the king of gods, and he only had 2 biological children, Hela and Thor. It would be a blessing for anyone to have 2. Seeing that his goal had been achieved, Sherlock did not hesitate and disappeared from the spot directly. The next second, he appeared in his room. As expected, Coulson was standing in the room with lifeless eyes. It was obvious that he was confused by the confusion spell. Sherlock did not hesitate at all and began to take off his equipment and prepare for the next drama. Outside, Thor, who had been accumulating power in the air for half a day, was in a difficult situation. After accumulating power for a long time, he was about to give his opponent a thundering blow, but was beaten by a pervert. For a moment, Thor's face was a little red. He could only withdraw his divine power helplessly, landed on the ground, and began to say goodbye to Jane. Since he had taken back his divine power, he had to return to the divine realm to deal with his naughty brother. Just as Thor and Jane were saying goodbye affectionately, Sherlock had also cleaned up the scene. After lying on the bed and cancelling the magic, he watched Coulson rush to him anxiously and pull him out of the quilt. Sherlock, who was acting well, looked at the anxious Coulson with a confused face. Coulson did not hesitate and explained the situation in a few words and was ready to take Sherlock to a safe place. But when the two rushed out of the door, Coulson was dumbfounded. There was no scene of the tall silver armor fighting aliens. There was only a scarred town with smoke everywhere. Sherlock looked at the confused Coulson with a look of looking at a fool, but the next second, Sherlock's face changed. His beloved car. Where is his big bird? Where is the big bad that he just got, and he didn't even have time to tear off the membrane? Why is there only a pool of red molten iron on the ground? Sherlock, whose face was as black as the bottom of a pot, pointed at the still red molten iron on the ground, and stared at Coulson, who was confused beside him, and asked, "My dear Agent Coulson, I think I need you to give a perfect explanation for my big bird. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 42 Daily Complaints. To be honest, Coulson was also speechless about Sherlock's request. After all, this was too much of a coincidence. The first time, the mysterious hammer fell from the sky and smashed the young man's car to pieces. The scene was so tragic. To be honest, if it weren't for the fact that the young man in front of him had some skills, it would be a question of whether he could see this guy now. The second time was this time. The new car that had just arrived yesterday, even the new car that Coulson felt was good, was attacked by the mysterious magician in New York when the aliens and the silver armor were fighting halfway yesterday. The angry silver armor began to shoot indiscriminately, and the point was very accurate. It only scratched Sherlock's big bird nearby. If Coulson was not very sure that Sherlock had no relationship with the silver armor, Coulson would even suspect that Sherlock had joined forces with those aliens to defraud insurance. After all, if this matter was made public, the insurance company would not believe it, and they would find some evidence to prove that you were really defrauding insurance. Just when Coulson was about to say something to Sherlock, a roar began to be heard not far away in the sky. Along with the roar, a flame appeared not far away in the sky. In just a short while, the flame became closer and closer under everyone's gaze. Everyone also discovered what the flame was. It was Iron Man Tony Stark himself. With the classic superhero landing posture, Tony landed right next to Sherlock. Sherlock was deeply contemptuous of Tony's classic lateness, which was similar to the American police, and the situation of posing when landing. Rolling his eyes countless times in annoyance, Sherlock did not give Tony any chance to talk at all, and directly gave him a head slap. Tony did not care about Sherlock's attitude, turned around and began to communicate with Coulson. Sherlock was not interested in what they said. Now Sherlock's head was full of his raptor. He even began to consider whether it would be a bit difficult for his magic to use the recovery to restore the pool of molten iron on the ground to the original appearance of the raptor. Just when Sherlock was thinking about how to restore his car to its original appearance, Tony grabbed Sherlock's shoulders from behind and dragged Sherlock to a deserted place without saying anything. Sherlock, a mortal, could not resist Tony in the iron armor unless Sherlock used magic. But now in broad daylight, Sherlock had just played a trick of substituting a cat for a prince in front of Coulson and successfully separated his vest. Now he naturally would not abandon his Taoism and use magic in public, so he naturally let Tony drag him to a deserted place nearby. Tony randomly found a deserted place and scanned Sherlock without saying anything. After confirming that there were no eavesdropping devices around Sherlock, he opened his mask and looked at Sherlock seriously. "Hey, brat, I should have told you that shield is a very deep place. You shouldn't have any contact with them, especially your magical potions." Sherlock rolled his eyes in annoyance at Tony's words, and then shrugged his shoulders and replied, "Come on, Tony, I don't believe that they didn't ask you when they investigated my identity last time. Since they failed to do so, they can only start investigating the people around you." Pepper was with Coulson at the time, so there would be no suspicion. Then I'm the only one left. Those people in S.H.I.E.L.D. are not fools. When the hammer fell from the sky and hit my car, they came a little later than the insurance. If you cover up everything related to me too tightly, it will make S.H.I.E.L.D. suspicious, especially their leader. That guy is definitely a master who can doubt everything. Tony thought about Sherlock's words carefully and nodded in agreement, especially the part about Nick Fury. Just thinking about the black salted egg, Tony felt that what Sherlock said was not wrong at all. However, as an elder, he still had to intervene. At least before he died, Tony still felt that he had to be the barrier between Sherlock and S.H.I.E.L.D. After all, S.H.I.E.L.D. was not a good thing in his eyes. Okay, there is nothing wrong with what you said, but I still oppose you to have direct contact with S.H.I.E.L.D. Believe me, Sherlock, this is not a good thing. Tony still showed his uncle's majesty and spoke to Sherlock seriously. Although he knew that what Sherlock said was the truth, he still didn't want Sherlock to have too much contact with S.H.I.E.L.D. Hearing Tony's words, Sherlock's eyes quickly showed a smirk, like a thief who had succeeded in his plan, but on the surface he still looked at Tony seriously and answered, "Okay, I get it. I won't have too much contact with S.H.I.E.L.D. It's just a simple drug transaction at most, and I plan to let you be the middleman." Tony nodded, very satisfied when he heard the first half of Sherlock's words, but the second half made Tony break his defense and stared at Sherlock with wide eyes. "What?" Sherlock, whose train of thought was interrupted by Tony's question, looked at Tony with a look of astonishment. After sorting out his thoughts, he continued, "Don't make a fuss. I mean, I plan to let you be the middleman. I'm only responsible for providing the medicine. In short, I'm just a factory and you're the supplier. And I definitely won't give them too many medicines. I'll only give them a small amount of medicines, and there are only 3 types: antidotes, white moss medicines for treating trauma, and a very small amount of polyjuice. I've already told Carlson that I only accept gold transactions. You understand, my uncle?" After Sherlock's voice fell, Tony, as a businessman, almost instinctively understood what Sherlock meant. Sherlock didn't specify the price of the medicine. Based on the principle of rare goods, this also means that Tony can raise the price at will. And these medicines are not just medicines, they can also be used as capital to exchange for something other than gold, especially for the current SHIELD. This is even more true. After understanding what Sherlock meant, the two men, one big and one small, instantly smiled like foxes. They no longer felt disgusted when looking at the S.H.I.E.L.D. staff members around them who were wearing black suits. Instead, their eyes were shining, as if they saw a pile of walking gold coins. Chapter 43 Follow-up and Departure. The uncle and nephew reached an agreement at a very fast speed. For Sherlock, it was his own money anyway. The output of the magic potion was so low, so it wouldn't be a problem for me to sell it to S.H.I.E.L.D. at 3 or 4 times the price, right? For Tony, it was even more so. Anyway, I could get it directly from Sherlock, so it wouldn't be a big problem for me to sell it to S.H.I.E.L.D. at double the price, right? Compared with the big player of S.H.I.E.L.D., I, Tony Stark, am just a small businessman. You are a State Department after all, and you can't let me sell it to you at a loss, right? It just so happened that neither Tony nor Sherlock liked the current S.H.I.E.L.D. so much, so it wouldn't be too much for the two of them to join forces to pit him, right? Well, the world where only S.H.I.E.L.D. was hurt was reached in an instant. After the two quickly reached a consensus on this matter, Tony then approached Sherlock's ear mysteriously and muttered in a low voice, "You little brat, that magical armor is in your hands, right?" Sherlock rolled his eyes at Tony's words. After all this time, and even using S.H.I.E.L.D. to lay the groundwork for so long, Tony's ultimate goal turned out to be the destroyer armor in his own library. Sherlock gave Tony an unhappily "Look at what you said, are you talking human?" expression, and then hesitantly nodded to Tony. Seeing Sherlock nod, Tony's eyes suddenly became bright, and the whole person became visibly excited, but before Tony could say anything, Sherlock directly poured a bucket of cold water on Tony. "Don't even think about it now. First of all, I haven't studied it thoroughly yet, so I put it away. And I can't guarantee that, if I take it out now, the person who controls it can still control it. Secondly, this thing belongs to the magic side, and you, a person on the technology side, can't use it. Why are you so excited?" Although Sherlock had said it very bluntly, Tony still had no intention of giving up, and began to argue with reason. The two of them started a fierce debate, from alchemy to circuits, from programming to control, from energy cores to armor materials. In the end, of course, Sherlock was defeated. While lamenting that he regretted not having learned enough, he secretly cursed Tony for not being a martial artist. The scope of his talk was too broad, directly approaching Sherlock's knowledge blind spot. In the end, Sherlock had no choice but to make two requests. The first point was to find a battle armor for himself later. Sherlock also wanted to experience what it felt like to fly home at super high speed in the air. The second point was to ask Tony to find a way to get the money for his car from S.H.I.E.L.D. After all, if Sherlock calls the insurance company again, let alone what the insurance company thinks, whether they are considering putting Sherlock on the blacklist, Sherlock himself will feel a little embarrassed. And this time, Sherlock decided not to have the car, but to have money this time. Sherlock felt that this place seemed to be incompatible with him. His beloved car had been broken here twice, and if nothing unexpected happened, Thor and his friends had already returned to Asgard, and it was unknown when they would come back next time. In addition, Sherlock was tempted by the destroyer armor in his library, so he had no intention of continuing the self-driving tour, and only wanted to go back and study his new equipment as soon as possible. Tony naturally agreed to Sherlock's request and contacted Jarvis without hesitation, asking Jarvis to drive the Mark II that he had used as an engineering prototype in the warehouse, and then turned around to find Coulson to do business. Seeing that Tony went to find Coulson, Sherlock didn't care and began to stroll around the town, trying to find Jane and the others, not to mention that Sherlock really found them. At this time, Jane still thought that Thor would come back soon. She looked at the sky eagerly, as if waiting for the opening of the Rainbow Bridge. But what Jane didn't know was that her brother, who was so called for his true love, was probably swinging a hammer to smash the bridge at this moment. Looking at Jane, who was like a waiting stone for her husband, Sherlock felt a little bit reluctant. After all, he had been with Jane and her group for a long time, and Sherlock had already regarded them as friends. After thinking again and again, Sherlock pulled a few people to a deserted place and explained Thor's situation to Jan, Daisy Louise, and the Doctor. Sherlock even made it clear about the love, hatred, and grudges between Loki and Thor in Asgard. Daisy Louise was fine at first, but when she heard what Sherlock said, her eyes changed when she looked at Jane. After all, according to Sherlock, Thor and Loki were true love, and Jane was at most a mistress in front of these two brothers. But Jane obviously didn't have such an idea. After knowing that the Rainbow Bridge was destroyed by Sylvie to save some innocent lives, which caused Sol to be unable to come to Earth for a while, Jane even began to plan what research she should do to allow herself to go to Asgard. Looking at Jane, whose mind was full of love, Sherlock and Daisy Louise rolled their eyes in an unusually uniform manner, sighing that love makes people blind. However, it also made Jane cheer up and devote herself to her favorite research, which is much better than being a husband waiting stone. Among the few people, the only one who was still sober was the Doctor, although he was full of curiosity about Asgard mentioned by Sherlock, and even full of sighs about the love and hatred between Loki and Thor. But the Doctor was still very sober. After Daisy Louise accompanied Jan to leave, the Doctor pulled Sherlock to ask his doubts. Why did Sherlock know so much? In response to the Doctor's question, Sherlock smiled mysteriously and didn't say much. But the Doctor himself didn't know what he had in his mind, with an expression of sudden enlightenment, and then said that he would keep it secret. Sherlock was confused and didn't know what to say for a moment. He could only maintain his master's persona, nodded with a smile, said hello to Jane and Daisy Louise, and left in a hurry. When Sherlock returned to his small hotel, Tony had already finished talking to Coulson. Both of them seemed very satisfied with the price given by the other party, with smiles on their faces. The Mark II, which was one of the conditions, was also standing behind Tony. Seeing Sherlock coming back, Tony said hello to Coulson and came to Sherlock with the silver Mark II. You are finally back. I have settled all your conditions. Come on, I will help you put on the Mark II, and then we will go back to New York together, Tony said while raising the arm of the armor. After the gloves on the armor were transformed, various tools appeared. Sherlock's mouth twitched, and then he remembered that Tony's armor still needed the assistance of a mechanical arm to wear. Damn, it was sloppy. Chapter 44 Upgrading Your Equipment. Iron Man's armor is indeed very cool and full of black technology, but all of this is based on the situation of wearing with the help of a mechanical arm. Once the mechanical arm is lost, it is not a question of whether it is cool or not. If it is worn manually, That guy is just a pure social death. Yes, Sherlock enjoyed such a social death scene. Tony helped Sherlock wear the Mark II armor purely by hand and in full view of the public. For Sherlock, such behavior is no different from pooping in public. Even when Tony excitedly disassembled the Mark II and called Sherlock to come and stand, Sherlock's mind inexplicably popped up a soul-deep question. If you are taking a shower and a disaster occurs in the bathhouse, and this disaster has attracted national attention at a very fast speed, and outside the scene are reporters, crowds of onlookers, and live broadcasts of self-media. As a survivor of this disaster, when you are rescued, the only thing you can use to cover your face is a towel. Excuse me, do you use it to cover your face or to cover your key parts? Sherlock originally thought that this was just a joke, but he never expected that he would face a similar situation one day. Sherlock's choice was also very simple: to cover his face! Exclamation mark. He forced Tony to put on the helmet and visor of the armor first. Sherlock said that it didn't matter what else he did. It would be a social death. As long as I covered my face, I would have nothing to be ashamed of. Putting aside this socially deadly process, Sherlock still had a high opinion of Tony's Mark armor. Apart from anything else, just flying at supersonic speed in the sky was enough to make Sherlock forget the socially deadly experience of wearing it. And as a sensible guy, Sherlock only experienced Tony's armor for a while. After all, this thing was fine for Sherlock as a toy. If it really came down to it, how fast could it fly? As fast as a portal? Sherlock was now a player who could teleport far away and directly apparate at close range. After about an hour of flight, the two successfully returned to New York. After landing, Sherlock removed the armor on his body and left Tony's villa with the phantom apparition. An hour later, Sherlock drove the Shelby Raptor Bahamut customized version bought with the compensation money from S.H.I.E.L.D. back to Tony's house, and Tony's face became a little better. At first, he thought that Sherlock had run away. Sherlock persuaded Tony to calm down and think that Sherlock did nothing wrong. After all, it was the compensation money paid by S.H.I.E.L.D. If it was not spent cleanly, not to mention Sherlock, even Tony would feel a little unreliable. After all, the black salted egg gave people the feeling of cunning and treacherous. After getting his beloved car, Sherlock no longer hesitated, threw Tony an arm of the destroyer armor, and hid in the library to study the core of the destroyer armor. Although Tony was quite dissatisfied with only one arm being thrown to him, he had no way to deal with Sherlock, and he immediately devoted himself to the research of the destroyer armor. Although the two of them worked on their own, they really did find something out of their research. Let's talk about Tony first. Although he has not found a way to thoroughly analyze the metal composition of the destroyer armor, the structure of the armor itself gave Tony a lot of inspiration, and he designed a very classic folding steel armor, which is the Mark V armor. However, because it needs to be compressed and reduced, the protection and attack methods of the new armor are greatly reduced, and it is far less useful than the Mark IV that Tony is wearing now. As for Sherlock, he was isolated from everything in the library and was not worried that his research core would be discovered by anyone. He made bold assumptions and carefully verified them, and soon he figured out what the core was. If nothing unexpected happens, this thing should be a bit similar to the sun. It relies on the magic runes to lock the power of the sun, and it is still the power of the runes that allows Loki to remotely control the armor. Sherlock quickly erased the runes used for remote control in the core, and then he took out the full picture of the destroyer armor. Seeing that Sherlock finally exploded, Tony no longer hesitated, and the two began to study the destroyer armor like perverts. With the help of Sherlock's magic knowledge and Tony's smart brain, the two quickly studied what they needed. Sherlock used alchemy to make something similar to a tie with the core of the destroyer. The golden energy core was decorated in the middle of a tie buckle with gorgeous gemstones, providing power and amplification for the armor Sherlock refined. And Sherlock's armor, no, it can no longer be called armor, it should be called combat uniforms. Sherlock was very showy and used the metal of the destroyer as raw material to refine a suit full of magic. The overall reference was made to the costume of Elia Saint-Suisse, the protagonist of the anime The Ancient Magus Bride, that Sherlock had watched before crossing. However, the helmet was still the one Tony gave Sherlock. It was not a complete copy of Elia Saint-Suisse. Sherlock directly integrated the function of the helmet with the clothes. It was not only a show-off, but the most important thing was that the protection was not low. Tony had tested it and found that his palm cannon could not cause any damage. Of course, Sherlock also realized the quick transformation function that Sherlock had been thinking about. He could change clothes quickly by just pulling the collar button on the collar rope. Thanks to the omnipotent magic and the help of the traceless expansion spell. Of course, Tony could not lose sight of one thing while taking care of the other. Although the metal raw materials of the destroyer armor could not be a substitute for palladium metal after the experiment, this thing was much more durable than the metal on the earth now. Especially after Sherlock finished refining his clothes, there were still a lot of materials left. Sherlock naturally would not let these precious materials go to waste. All of them were used on Tony's Mark V, and even helped Mark V to have a wave of magic enhancement. Facing Sherlock's epic reinforcement, the defense of the Mark V, which was originally only used for emergency, even surpassed the normal Mark IV, and even its only weapon, the palm cannon, had the effect of penetrating armor. Of course, the price was also very obvious, and the energy consumption rate of the Mark V also began to rise sharply. Later, Tony even had to add a miniature arc reactor to the Mark V to keep up with the energy consumption rate of the Mark V. Chapter 45. Mission completed. A genius in magic and a genius in technology, the two worked together and came up with all kinds of wild ideas. Their armor was completed very quickly, and at this stage, it was close to perfection. After completing the manufacturing of their respective equipment, it was naturally the display stage. Sherlock and Tony began to wear their respective equipment face to face. Sherlock's side can be said to have performed magic to the extreme. Just by pulling the tie rope, the pure black suit with dark gold patterns and the jacket with gold edging twisted and flew out of the tie rope. Almost in the blink of an eye, it had already climbed onto Sherlock's body. The next second, Sherlock, who was originally standing in place, had turned into a gentleman wearing a cyberpunk helmet and an unusually fitted suit. Sherlock almost performed the mystery and elegance of magic to the extreme. On the other side, Tony performed technology to the extreme. The Mark V, the size of a suitcase, quickly began to cover Tony's whole body as Tony stepped, lifted, and pulled it. Countless armor plates like armor, gathering piece by piece, wrapping Tony's body. Because of Sherlock, compared with the original, Mark V has a larger energy consumption, and the arc reactor on the chest has been changed from 1 to 2 arranged up and down. After wearing it, the two reactors light up at the same time, showing a light like a capsule. Inspired by the destroyer armor, and with the help of Sherlock's magic, Tony's Mark V can even mobilize some armor plates through the rotation displacement of the armor plates to concentrate on defending some heavy attacks. With the addition of metal from the destroyer armor, the overall improvement of Mark V can be said to be not a little bit higher, and even has a little bit of Tony's nano armor in the later period. The two can be said to have their own characteristics, but when the two really put on their own armor, they look at each other's armor and are full of speechless. I don't know if it's because the science side and the magic side are naturally incompatible, or because Sherlock is a wizard and Tony is an INT. The two began to ridicule each other with all kinds of dirty words as soon as they appeared. In Tony's opinion, Sherlock's suit is useless except for showing off. There are flaws everywhere. As long as Tony wants, Sherlock's cuffs and trouser legs are all weak points that can be attacked. Tony can even think of no less than 5 ways of attack, including poison gas, insects, nanoworms, etc. It can be said that in Tony's opinion, Sherlock's suit is useless except for preventing the sneak attack of the old six. In Sherlock's opinion, Tony's armor looks not much different from those knights in the Middle Ages, especially with the armor plates of the destroyer armor. It looks more like those iron cans wearing scale armor. To put it bluntly, if a team fight really breaks out, Tony's role is at most the mount standing in the front, who can't be any more iron. The only difference is that the color of this iron tee is as showy as ever. The two of them disliked each other so much, and then they complained in unison, which made Pepper, who was in the audience of the show, laugh so hard that she almost couldn't. She even felt like a mistress who had interfered with Sherlock and Tony's relationship. Fortunately, Pepper was just thinking about it and didn't expose it. Otherwise, Sherlock and Tony would not look at each other with dislike, but naked disgust. There is no discrimination, it's just a need for the plot. After the two quarreled for a long time, no one could convince the other, so they were too lazy to continue quarreling. What's more, after being busy for so long, both Sherlock and Tony felt hungry, especially Sherlock, who just finished his trip and went directly to Tony's villa to study day and night. Sherlock felt that he especially needed a delicious meal to comfort his stomach. Fortunately, Pepper was still so smart and capable. She knew the nature of these two men and had arranged everything. Sherlock naturally wouldn't be polite to his uncle and future aunt. After showing off a lot of delicious high-end ingredients like a whirlwind, he wiped his mouth with satisfaction and prepared to leave and go home. After all, he had been away for so long, and now he was full of food and wine. Sherlock missed the soft big bed in his doghouse. Tony naturally had no opinion on Sherlock's departure, but he had a lot of opinions about Sherlock not forgetting to move a box of expensive wine from his wine cellar, even if he was leaving. But it was obvious that Sherlock didn't care about Tony's opinion. He threw the wine in the back of his Shelby and fixed it. After saying hello, he left 20 bottles of antidote, 10 bottles of white moss potion, and 2 bottles of polyjuice potion, and then drove away in his car. Time was tight and the task was heavy. Sherlock also needed to get the souvenirs for his uncles. After all, he had been out for a long time. If he didn't bring anything back, he would probably be beaten up by his uncles. The uncles who came from the military were playing pranks, and Sherlock said that he really couldn't stand it. Even thinking about it made Sherlock feel like he was going to have PTSD. He drove quickly to a shopping mall in the city center. Sherlock planned very well. As a soap for handkerchiefs, buying a more expensive comfortable dark colored handkerchief would be enough to get rid of this gentleman. Even the ghost was easy to deal with. When Sherlock was making his own armor, he took advantage of Tony's convenience to make a skull mask similar to his helmet. There is also an offline version of Jarvis built in. With the box of original skull head covers of the ghost's combat power can definitely be taken to the next level. The old man price is even easier to deal with. Just give this Mediterranean grandfather a hat that is both practical and beautiful. After all, this gentleman is a player who never takes off his hat in front of anyone. As for why Sherlock knew that this gentleman was a Mediterranean, Sherlock could only say that this was a mistake he made when he was young and ignorant. Because of this mistake, Sherlock paid a price that made him cry, and not just by mentioning it. In short, it's all tears. As for the gifts from the remaining uncles, they were also easy to handle. This is why I moved Tony's wine cellar. 2 bottles of good wine per person. Neither Xiao nor Gates would have any objections, and they would even be happy for a long time. Xiao likes to collect all kinds of famous wines, which is a kind of collecting fetish. As for Gates, this guy really likes to drink, and he has been jealous of Xiao collection for a long time. These small details also gave Sherlock a feeling that his uncles were real people rather than characters from the game. In short, this feeling is unexpectedly good. Chapter 46, An Adopted Child Bride, Part 1. After selling the things, Sherlock drove his beloved car all the way to his gun store at lightning speed, and the rate of turning heads along the way was quite high. In the lighthouse country, generally speaking, driving a Raptor will not have such a high rate of turning heads, but a Shelby is different. As a synonym for high-end customization in Ford, the effect of a Shelby in the lighthouse country is comparable to the effect of a supercar on the street. Especially this time, Sherlock took advantage of Tony's money from S.H.I.E.L.D. and added a little more, so that he could buy this Shelby Raptor Badger version. To be honest, compared with the Raptor, this thing, whether it is power or appearance, or even suspension, every one of them satisfies Sherlock's heart and makes Sherlock beautiful. After leaving the city, Sherlock stepped on the accelerator to the end, showing the style of whoever releases the accelerator in the Badger arena, and finally returned to the gun store he had been thinking about before dark. Pushing open the door, and smelling the familiar smell of gun oil and gunpowder, Sherlock felt that he had never felt so at ease. Carrying the gifts he bought, and the box of expensive wine, Sherlock hummed a little tune, and walked to the second floor leading to his doghouse, intending to go back and rest for a night, and then distribute the gifts when everyone was gathered the next day. Just as Sherlock was about to push open the door to the second floor, a nice female voice sounded in Sherlock's ears. Caught off guard, Sherlock almost threw the things in his hand to the ground. "I'm sorry, sir, that is a private area. In order to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings, please leave the counter." Although the female voice was gentle, the content was not gentle at all, and even had a bit of threat. "You have to know that this is a gun store, with weapons everywhere, and even those who like to buy for free dare not set foot here. After all, these clerks have real weapons in their hands, and no one knows if they will really be shot if they come here to buy for free." But who is Sherlock? The only inheritor of HP magic in the world, the nephew of the richest man Tony Stark, the guest of the great Camotage, and the owner of the largest firearms and training store in New York. Can Sherlock bear such grievances? Sherlock wanted to see who was so bold that he dared to stop him from returning to his dog's kennel. What the hell? Sherlock, who was originally full of confidence, turned around and was so scared that the last few words of his confession in his mind trembled. The reason was very simple. Sherlock saw someone he was very familiar with. Skye, the shockwave girl in the TV series Agents of SHIELD, was still relatively immature at this time. She stared at Sherlock, who was holding a lot of things, with her eyes very seriously, but her hand was always on a pistol on her waist. It seemed that, as long as Sherlock made any unusual moves, Skye would draw his gun without hesitation and show what American IAI was. Sherlock was a little speechless when he looked at Skye, who was still eager to try. Did he poke the nest of the plot character? Damn, when I go out to play, I can see Thor, and when I go home, I can see Shockwave. Just when Sherlock was doubting his life and Skye was getting more and more nervous, the two finally attracted the attention of others. Sherlock's uncles and a little girl came out from the office area at the back. "Sherlock, you're back," Soap shouted in surprise when he saw Sherlock and what was in Sherlock's hand. With Soap's shout, the originally serious warning scene suddenly became a little awkward. Especially Skye, who just wanted to draw a gun at her boss, was enough to make her feel embarrassed. Fortunately, the uncles didn't care about the little story of the two. After seeing what was in Sherlock's hand, they rushed over to divide the spoils and began to show off the gifts Sherlock brought to them. The only ones who were still rational were Price and the ghost standing behind Price. The two did not move from beginning to end, but looked at Sherlock and Skye with more interest. Finally, under Price's gaze, Skye could only put away her emotions, came to Sherlock's side, and held out her hand to Sherlock. "Hello, boss, I'm Skye. Colonel Price asked me to be the cashier." Maybe because the incident happened suddenly, and the embarrassment just now had not been completely resolved, Skye's speech was a bit incoherent. Sherlock still hadn't recovered from the surprise that his employee was actually the famous Shockwave girl, and shook hands with Skye in a daze. Sherlock's reaction made Skye, who was already a little embarrassed, even more embarrassed. Fortunately, at this time, Xiao Qiang discovered that Sherlock was not driving the original Raptor back, but the huge Shelby, and he screamed, "What the hell? What did you do when you went out, you little brat, to bring back this good stuff?" After saying that, he took the car keys from Sherlock's hand without caring about Sherlock's reaction. Then, he raised his arm and called for Soap Gates and others who were originally paying attention to the gift to quickly shift their attention to the Shelby Raptor at the door. Several people who originally came from the military could not resist the charm of this beast at all. They followed Xiao Qiang out and wanted to feel what it felt like to drive this beast. In order to avoid further embarrassment, Skye naturally ran out with Xiao Qiang's group. It was not until Skye disappeared in the store that Sherlock came back to his senses. He looked at Price standing behind him in a daze and asked, "Excuse me, where did this guy come from?" Price shrugged his shoulders and said in response to Sherlock's question, "I picked it up. You can't expect us to sit at the cash register and count those green pieces of paper, right? And I don't know how to operate the cash register machines. I saw that this girl is good at operating computers, so I picked her up from the street to be a cashier. If you don't like her, you can fire her." Facing Price's words, Sherlock could only smile awkwardly and then quickly said that it didn't matter. After all, Price was right. He couldn't sit behind the cash register forever. It was normal to find an employee Seeing that Sherlock didn't seem to have any aversion to Sky, Price nodded and glanced at the ghost behind him. The ghost immediately understood what Price meant and walked out with the mask Sherlock gave him. It was not until the ghost left the store that Price looked at the lively group of people outside and the new car and said meaningfully to Sherlock beside him, "It looks like you've encountered a lot of problems outside this time. How's it going? Is there any tail?" Although Price said it lightly, Sherlock felt a chill down his spine. After all, what the old man Price meant was, if there is any trouble that hasn't been solved, I can help you solve it. As for Price's solution, it was also very simple. Just push it all the way, and it will be okay. Sherlock even suspected that, if his uncle really took action, not to mention that the passing dogs would have to be slapped twice, even the ant nests around the trouble would probably have to be filled with mercury. He quickly smiled and rejected Price's kindness. No, 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 there is no tail. I'm just traveling. What kind of trouble can't I solve by myself? Chapter 47, An Adopted Child Bride, Part 2. After hearing Sherlock's answer, Price's originally cold face finally showed a smile, and he turned back into the uncle Sherlock was familiar with. Even the surrounding environment became a lot more relaxed. Seeing that Price was not so serious anymore, Sherlock looked at the little girl who had been standing behind Price. The little girl was very beautiful, and most importantly, she had beautiful green hair. The only thing that surprised Sherlock was that this girl who looked like a Barbie doll didn't know why, but she gave people a feeling of being a bit no. Sherlock was extremely curious about this girl he had never seen before, especially since this no girl was following Uncle Price, who had been a single dog for thousands of years. This alone was enough to make Sherlock feel itchy. By the way, Uncle Price, I've been wanting to ask you since just now, who is this little girl behind you? Is she your daughter? Sherlock's face was full of curiosity, and he looked at Price standing there with a teasing look, as if he was waiting for some shocking gossip to appear. As an old hand, could Price be fooled by a rookie like Sherlock? With a smile on his face, he glanced at Sherlock condescendingly, and then slowly answered Sherlock's question. She's not my daughter, she's your child bride. Facing Price's answer, Sherlock felt Spartan. Damn, the King dynasty has been gone for more than 100 years. Why are they still playing with the toys of the previous dynasty? What's more, this is her mother's lighthouse. Not to mention that Sherlock himself is not a copper alchemist. Even if he is really a copper alchemist, this little girl is old enough for Sherlock to give her a life sentence. Looking at Sherlock, who was so Spartan, Price laughed, patted Sherlock's shoulder fiercely, and said, "Okay, I won't tease you anymore. This is Lorna. She is asked by a friend to stay here for a while. You have so many rooms upstairs. You won't disagree, right?" It would have been better if Price didn't say anything. After he finished speaking, Sherlock's expression quickly changed from Spartan to that of an old man on the subway. He looked at the beautiful girl, then at Price, the rough man, and said it after a long time. "Nothing else, my dear Uncle Price. If I'm not mistaken, this should be an underage girl." Sherlock also emphasized the words underage and girl, as if reminding Price of something. But Price obviously misunderstood Sherlock's meaning, and pointed proudly at the thing in the girl's hand. Well, a pink R-series automatic rifle with a cute Hello Kitty pattern printed on it, and even a unicorn sticker on the magazine. Looking at Price's seemingly very proud look, Sherlock once again felt that his whole person seemed to be in a bad state. Was this what he meant? Sherlock's face was almost twisted into an embarrassing shape. "Uncle Price, what I mean is that you should send her to school. This beautiful Miss Lorna is now wearing a beautiful little skirt and carrying a school bag in a spacious school bus, instead of wearing a small tactical suit and a rifle like now. Who would teach such a big child how to shoot?" Looking at Sherlock, whose expression was about to collapse, Price felt particularly interesting. He ignored Sherlock and patted Lorna's head. "Little Lorna, go back and have a rest, take a shower, and we will have dinner later. You are in for a treat today. Sherlock's cooking is so delicious." After listening to Price's words, Lorna, who was still relatively indifferent at this time, nodded expressionlessly, and then turned to walk towards the passage on the second floor. It was not until Lorna's figure disappeared at the stairs that Price became serious. Lorna's identity is very special. One of my friends brought Lorna out of a laboratory. Sherlock interrupted Price before he finished speaking and asked in surprise, Sokovia? Sherlock's interruption also surprised Price for a moment, and then he looked at Sherlock and asked, you know? Sherlock's question was just a subconscious reaction. After all, the name Lorna, plus the green hair, even if Sherlock was stupid, he knew the identity of this girl, the North Star among mutants. But the problem is here. Sherlock checked this world at the beginning of the journey and found that there was no trace of mutants at all. The only ones who were related to mutants were Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. But in the movie, these two guys were set to obtain superpowers through the scepter with the Mind Stone brought by Loki. So when Price mentioned the laboratory, Sherlock subconsciously thought of the country of Sokovia, which is the country where Avengers 2 takes place. It was also because of this place that the civil war within the Avengers was caused. But when facing Price, Sherlock had no way of telling him where he got the news. After thinking for a while, he could only smile awkwardly and said to Price, I only know a little bit. Please continue. After Price rolled his eyes at Sherlock, he did not continue to dwell on why Sherlock knew this news, and then continued. Lorna is the only child brought out of the laboratory. God knows what those crazy scientists did to this child, which caused Lorna to be a little emotionally deficient until now. And the most important thing is, I don't know how these people did it, to give Lorna a little different ability from ordinary people. Brat, I know you also have some unknown little secrets. I hope you can help Lorna train, when you have time. After all, those rookies and I don't know how to play with these weird things. When Price said this, the sadness in his eyes could not be suppressed. Although Sherlock didn't know Price's past, but a long time of getting along also let Sherlock know one thing, that is, Price's so-called friend is probably no longer alive. It is precisely because of this that Price transferred almost all of his emotions to the little girl, which is why he said these words to Sherlock. Although he understood Price, the uncle who had taken care of him for a long time and was almost the same as his father, when Price pointed out that he had a little secret that was unknown to others, Sherlock still broke out in a cold sweat. Well, Uncle Price, you know everything? Faced with Sherlock's probing, Price just rolled his eyes and answered Sherlock's question. I know nothing. I just roughly guessed that there is something different about you. After all, the commotion you made after taking leave during the 7 years of training was not small in our opinion. After hearing Price's answer, Sherlock had no choice but to agree and smile awkwardly at Price. What else could he do? Chapter 48, Unusual Daily Life, Part 1. After having a semi-frank talk with Price that night, Price no longer objected to Sherlock contacting his clients. As Sherlock contacted him, Sherlock was also surprised to find that the water in Marvel was really deep, and the main theme was a hot and humid situation. To make an inappropriate analogy, if the ordinary people in the entire Marvel world are compared to the sea level of a vast ocean, then the group of Avengers led by Tony can be said to be icebergs exposed above the sea level. Tall and mighty, enough for everyone to look up, they are high above, but exposed to everyone's vision, just like Hollywood stars. The terrifying question is that under these icebergs, under the dark sea level, there is a huge base of icebergs, quietly submerged in the cold sea water. If nothing unexpected happens, these beings below the sea level will have nothing to do with the ordinary people on the sea level in their lifetime. But this does not mean that they will not have anything to do with Sherlock's gun shop. In just a few days, Sherlock saw a world that he had never imagined before. The gangs were just small fry. The real big bosses were the killer groups like the Mercenary Union or the Continental Hotel. These people, together with the intelligence dealers and SHIELD, and a small number of super players, formed this huge underground world hidden under the ordinary world. Sherlock even met a character who only existed in movies and TV series in his previous life in this field that he had never touched before. John Wick, known as the Night Devil. That is the great killer with Keanu Reeves' face, who killed from the first step to the last step because of a dog. After meeting this person, Sherlock even stared at the strange eyes of Price, Soap and others, and took a photo with this great killer. Although John Wick in the photo looked confused, Sherlock was still very satisfied. As for how Sherlock met this killer, it was more dramatic. Who would have thought that his small gun shop and the training base behind it would actually have some connection with all those underground forces? After only a few days of contact, Sherlock was surprised to find that his training ground was the only peaceful area recognized by the entire underground world. The gun shop undertakes the modification and sale of weapons, while the training ground undertakes the training and training of novices. In the entire underground world, whether it is intelligence dealers, killers, or mercenaries, they cannot act within the direction of the weapon shop, otherwise they will be hunted down by all forces. After all, no one wants their novice village to be messed with, right? As for walking out of the novice village, it is a competition between various forces. Even for the safety of those rookies, even the most basic intelligence is not allowed to be exchanged. The only thing that can be done here is to buy weapons, modify weapons, train, and pay for training. John Wick is naturally one of the trainers in the venue, and occasionally he will guest star as a training instructor to earn some extra money. Sherlock is naturally John Wick, whom he met at the training ground. After learning about Sherlock's identity, John Wick did not refuse Sherlock's friendship. Sherlock also learned something different from the movie. Although John Wick also has a wife he loves deeply, unlike the movie, John Wick's wife is unusually healthy. Even the place where they live is not far from Sherlock's gun shop. After knowing this, Sherlock was relieved. In any case, this John Wick will not kill through the entire underground world like in the movie. You have to know that his home is actually a little connected to the Continental Hotel. Sherlock is really afraid that his home will be stolen one day. Of course, in addition to throwing out these things that shattered Sherlock's 3 views, the only thing that made Sherlock feel bold was Lorna, the little lolly. I don't know if it was because Price's ridicule of the child bride when the two met made the little girl take it seriously, or because Sherlock's cooking was too delicious, or because Sherlock was also a kind with abilities that ordinary people didn't have in her eyes. In short, after dinner that night, Lorna liked to pester Sherlock whenever she had nothing to do, and it almost reached the point where Lorna would follow Sherlock wherever he went. This also made Price jealous for a while. Finally, after Sherlock promised a lot of benefits and signed many humiliating treaties, Price barely suppressed his anger that his daughter was abducted by Huang Mao. Of course, Sherlock did not forget Price's promise and began to find ways to train Lorna's ability. According to the memory of the previous life, Lorna's ability should be inherited from Magneto, that is, the ability to control metal. Sherlock would take Lorna to the training ground after the end of business every day. He asked Lorna to use her ability to sort out the eggshells on the training ground and the warhead stuck in the wall. At first, Lorna could not use her ability well, and even did not use anything all night. In the end, Sherlock used magic to clean up the venue. Fortunately, Sherlock is an existence that has mastered the magic knowledge of the whole world. Since he can't rely on training Lorna's ability like training muscles, it is better to train according to magic. So under Sherlock's intervention, little Lorna also got her own magic book. Spiritual training and control, detailed explanation of metal composition, electricity and magnetism, the fourth fundamental force in the universe, advanced mathematics, metal smelting and development, world geography, detailed explanation of metal minerals in various places. It can be said that except for the first book, which is slightly related to magic, the rest have nothing to do with magic. Even Price and others would say WTF when they saw it. However, these books were taken out by Sherlock, a magician, and the first one was really a magic training manual. In addition to Sherlock's packaging of these books, little Lorna was convinced that these books were Sherlock's magic books. In addition, every time Lorna applied the formulas and knowledge in the book, she could complete Sherlock's training very well. This led to the fact that, although she didn't understand what those formulas meant and where they came from, Lorna was convinced that these were pure magic formulas. After she learned them, she would definitely be able to use her magic as freely as Sherlock did. Because of this strange belief, whether it is Price and others, or Sky, who is a clerk in the gun shop, or Sherlock, they often see little Lorna holding those magic books that look very old, but have extremely advanced content and studying hard. For such a result, Sherlock's uncles who know little Lorna's details always make a one-handed number 6 when they see Sherlock, and they hate Sherlock's trick of deceiving children. Sherlock said he didn't care about it, just tell him whether it is useful or not. The only one who cares may be Skye, the silly girl. This poor orphan who found a job and also has food and accommodation after seeing little Lorna's efforts is embarrassed to just sit behind the cashier every day and do nothing. After obtaining Sherlock's consent and taking a month's salary in advance, Skye also bought a set of second-hand programming books on the market according to her hobbies and began to study hard. As for the two women in the gun shop who started to roll up inexplicably, Sherlock could only spread his hands and say that you are happy. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49, Unusual Daily Life, Part 2. For a whole month, Sherlock's life was comparable to that of an ancient young master who only played with maids and listened to music in brothels. Sherlock almost forgot that he was in the world of Marvel. On weekdays, after all the guests left, Sherlock's greatest pleasure was to bully Lorna, who was still a little girl, and deeply explore the spirit of the old six, from ability to physical, and finally to IQ. Basically, after making Lorna angry, she activated her superpowers and controlled a large number of shells and warheads to attack Sherlock, but as a magician, Sherlock could easily deal with such physical attacks from little girls. Basically, he solved Lorna's attack with a wave of his magic wand every time, and sometimes he was very elegant and turned all the flying shells and warheads into petals. Although it looked extremely beautiful, and even the person standing in the sea of flying petals was very handsome and attractive, but unfortunately this person had a mouth, and the picture was extremely beautiful without opening his mouth, just like an idle drama that made Lorna intoxicated. But as soon as she opened her mouth, her blood pressure would rise. Every petal was a naked mockery of Lorna. If her superpowers couldn't beat Sherlock, she would sometimes get angry and wave her fists to fight Sherlock to the death. But how could Lorna, with her small arms and legs, beat Sherlock, who was 1.9 meters tall and had 8 abdominal muscles? Basically, Sherlock could control her with one hand. No matter how hard Lorna tried, she could hardly hurt Sherlock. She would even occasionally be played bad by Sherlock to feel what zero gravity felt like. And every time Lorna was controlled by Sherlock, she would hold her mouth and look for the old man Price with a wronged face. Who is Price? He is a tough guy. To Sherlock, he is basically equivalent to his elder. So, what Skye, who was sitting at the cashier, often saw was that the little Lorna went to Price's office with a wronged face. After a while, Price, who was 1.9 meters tall and weighed 180 kilograms, rushed to the training ground at the back with a dark face, a cigar in his mouth, and a pink Series rifle with Hello Kitty's prints in his hand. He was followed by a proud little Lorna. Then, the sound of gunfire like pouring beans would be heard from the training ground at the back, mixed with Lorna's silver bell-like laughter, Price's scolding, and Sherlock's weird screams. With Sherlock's recovery, even if Price and Sherlock quarreled fiercely, there would be no loss. Over time, it even developed into Sherlock fighting against Price, Soap, and Ghost alone. The weapons even developed into simple light weapons and gradually developed into heavy firepower. Don't ask why Gates and Zhaoqiang didn't participate. In order to avoid being beaten, Sherlock begged for mercy in front of the two men, and finally contracted Tony's collection of good wine for the two men for a whole year. Only then did the two men agree not to fight. Of course, as a fun-loving person, Sherlock naturally couldn't let go of Skye, who was just a simple cashier. But Skye grew up on the streets and had seen all kinds of monsters. Sherlock's sword-selling behavior for fun suffered an unprecedented Waterloo at Skye's hands. Skye's way of dealing with Sherlock's fun-loving behavior can be said to be a textbook approach to dealing with fun-loving people's fun-loving behavior. It sounds complicated, but in fact, it can be said in one sentence: just ignore Sherlock. No matter how Sherlock plays a prank, Skye always has a meaningful smile. Even if he was tricked, he was very calm. He changed his clothes when he should, and reported when he should, and then smiled and watched Sherlock's embarrassed look choking on the ground, and then was pressed by Price to apologize to Skye. Over time, Sherlock also gave up such fun-loving behavior towards Skye. Of course, as a man of fun, Sherlock simply couldn't give up the time when he was still in business. Under Price's suggestion, he occasionally played the role of a novice instructor for rookies. Whenever an organization sent a newcomer, Sherlock would play the role of an instructor according to Price's request. As for the novice tutorial set by Price, it can be said to be very simple and crude. 3 1cm thick alloy targets are given to the novices, which are respectively used to deal with pistols, rifles or submachine guns, spray guns or sniper rifles. In a month, there is no limit on bullets. A hole appears on the 3 alloy targets. Even if the novice tutorial is passed, you can proceed to the next training. If you don't complete the assessment of 3 holes in a month, then sorry, those rookies will be sent back directly, and the tuition fee will not be refunded. After learning about this course, Sherlock can be said to be rubbing his teeth. You must know that when Sherlock was training, there was no such strict teaching. Sherlock simply estimated that basically one target basically needs 10,000 bullets to form a hole. Price's move can be said to have directly omitted the process of novices being forced to practice shooting due to inaccurate shooting. Everyone who passes the novice assessment can be said to be a sharpshooter. Throwing out these daily words, Sherlock's biggest gain may be that he has become familiar with John Wick, an uncle who looks exactly like Keanu Reeves. Even after the two of them became familiar with each other, he went to John Wick's house as a guest, met John Wick's wife, and the legendary dog that triggered John Wick's massacre. Not only that, he also experienced John Wick's legendary Mustang sports car. It has to be said that, although John Wick's Mustang may not be as fast as the current sports car, and may not even be as fast as Sherlock's Shelby Raptor, as long as you drive this car on the street, it is definitely more cool than Sherlock's Shelby Raptor. This may also be one of the few high-profile things about John Wick. During this month, Sherlock can be said to have lived a fairy-like life, with a feeling of being happy and unwilling to leave, but don't forget that this is a world of Marvel. Many times, even if you don't want to find trouble, trouble is likely to find you. So, when Sherlock was indulging in such a happy daily life, Tony came uninvited. Tony made Sherlock's mentality completely collapse, and made Sherlock sure of one thing. Damn it, Tony will definitely be the one who is being teased in front of this fun person from now on. Chapter 50 Tony the Profligate. The reason why Sherlock had such an idea can be traced back to one morning. It was a sunny morning. Because of Skye, Sherlock didn't have to get up early to open the door and sit at the cashier. So Sherlock slept until noon, then got up and had a meal. After cleaning up, he went downstairs slowly, even thinking about how to have fun today. There was a roar of a car engine outside Sherlock's gun shop. The huge sound almost spread throughout the gun shop. Not only Sherlock, but even the uncles in the office, who had no training tasks, were alarmed. When several people squeezed out of the door of the gun shop in a hurry, they saw a 6*6 pickup truck modified from the Mercedes-Benz G63. Just one glance, Sherlock could confirm that the off-road beast rushing towards the gun shop had the top modification. It is no exaggeration to say that the Shelby Raptor Badger Edition parked at the door of Sherlock may be only a fraction of the price of the modification in front of the 6*6. This off-road beast rushed towards Sherlock's shop at a very fast speed. When it approached the door of Sherlock's shop, it drifted and flicked its tail and stopped steadily at the door of Sherlock's shop. Looking at the huge beast in front of him, Sherlock even felt that this thing was here to mess up the place. Not only Sherlock, but even Sherlock's uncles and Skye thought so. Several people unconsciously put their hands on the weapons they carried with them to facilitate the next conflict, but soon, with the opening of the car door, the tense atmosphere before the warders appeared without a trace. The reason is also very simple. The one who came down from the driver's seat was Tony's exclusive driver, the fat and happy brother. After the brother got off the car, he quickly walked to the back with his chubby legs and opened the door. Tony, wearing sunglasses and wearing an unusually arrogant outfit, calmly walked down from the back seat of this 6*6. Tony, who got out of the car, even did not forget to look at Shelby, who was parked in front of the store by Sherlock. He actually showed a contemptuous smile on his face without any concealment. What a rich dog. This was the unanimous thought of Sherlock's uncles, Skye, As for Sherlock, Sherlock was so angry that he had no time to complain. In Sherlock's opinion, this guy was just here to provoke him. Damn it, I know you are rich, but it is wrong for you to come here to show off. And Sherlock knew one thing, that Tony had no interest in off-road pickup trucks. What he liked most were those sports cars, and he was the one who liked off-road pickup trucks. This guy bought a top-level off-road pickup truck and ran in front of him, which was pure showing off. Sherlock even suspected that Tony was taking revenge on him for buying a car as soon as he came back with Tony in his armor. As Tony spoke, Sherlock immediately determined that Tony was doing this to take revenge on him. "Ah, my dear nephew, long time no see. You know, as your uncle, I have done a big deal for you. In order to get what you want to you, I even had to spend a little money to buy a big pickup truck to transport it for you." Listening to Tony's sarcastic words, Sherlock felt his blood pressure rising. At this moment, Sherlock finally empathized with Lorna, who was often pranked by him. Trying hard to suppress his anger, Sherlock smiled and looked at Tony, who was standing in front of him, and answered in the same sarcastic tone. "Ah, my dear uncle, that's really troublesome for you. Can you let me see what gave you such courage?" Facing Sherlock's sarcastic words, Tony was not panicked at all. He pointed his hand into the truck bed behind him, and then slowly answered Sherlock's question. "My dear nephew, I don't like your tone just now. I suggest you talk to me after watching the truck bed." Looking at the arrogant Tony, Sherlock rolled his eyes in annoyance and decided not to pay attention to this old man, who was still bubbling with anger at his age. He walked towards the back truck by himself. After arriving at the back truck and lifting the tarpaulin covering the back truck, even Sherlock had to speak foul language. "Fuck, Tony, did you go to rob the Federal Reserve?" The reason why Sherlock was so excited was that the scene in the back truck was too shocking. The entire back truck was full of gold bars. Pieces of 1 kilogram of gold bars were neatly stacked in the back truck. Just by lifting a corner of the tarpaulin, the dazzling golden light shocked Sherlock. Seeing Sherlock's shocked look, Tony's smugness on his face was even more undisguised. He walked up and patted Sherlock on the shoulder. "Look, young man, you still have a lot to learn." Looking at Tony, who was still pretending, Sherlock rolled his eyes in annoyance, and then he got to know the details with Tony. It didn't matter if he knew the truth. Sherlock had to give Tony a thumbs up. "If we talk about profiteers, it's you, Tony the big shit." The reason is also very simple. The source of Tony's car of gold bars is the big grudge dog and shield. When Sherlock left, he left 20 bottles of antidote, 10 bottles of white moss potion, and 2 bottles of polyjuice potion for Tony. Except for the 10 bottles of antidote that Tony kept for himself, the rest were sold by Tony, and the seller was the black salted egg and shield. When Sherlock sold it to Tony, he doubled the price on the vending machine in his library, and Tony, who was a jerk, sold it to Shield at a price that he didn't know how many times higher than the price he sold it to Tony. There was nearly 1.5 tons of gold in the entire back box. Tony even reinforced the back box of the pickup truck to pull the gold. You have to know that the total number of medicines sold to Shield is only 22 bottles. Even if the price of polyjuice potion is slightly higher, such a number is too exaggerated. Looking at Sherlock's stunned look, Tony felt that his vanity was greatly satisfied for a moment, and then he began to urge Sherlock to put the gold away quickly. Sherlock was naturally not polite, and performed a gold disappearance trick on the spot. Looking at the empty back box in an instant, Sherlock's uncles were unusually calm. The only one who was not calm was Sky. For a moment, Sky even began to doubt his own worldview. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.